Chapter 2214. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. I am Tamanaji outside the ancient underworld in a vast wilderness. A large area of divine light rolled up countless figures with broken armors. Against the raging gales, they surged forward violently. Upper extremity had Azura's death god saber on his back. Saber light flickered in his flesh as the terrifying law of slaughter continued to erode his body and destroy his divine will. His aura grew weaker and weaker. However, upper extremity did not dare to stop for even a moment. He held a tattered body tightly in his arms as he desperately used the divine escape technique towards the Archean realm. Your Highness, hang in there. I will bring you back to the divine realm of Tian Zhao, back to the deity king's side. You must hang in there. Upper extremity kept calling out. It was as long as his voice stopped, the descendant of the divine king of Tian Zhao would fall into eternal slumber. At this time, Junmo's situation was extremely dangerous. His entire body was covered with terrifying sword holes, and a majestic sword intent was rampaging wildly in his body. Sword Dao law particles were constantly gushing out from the sword holes all over Junmo's body. It was as if life was flowing out of them, and they couldn't be suppressed at all. Qin Hao had reversed Junmo's heavenly wheel, changed the source of the deity king's bloodline, and extracted his original strength. No matter how strong upper extremity's divine Dao was, he could not completely suppress the rampaging sword will in his body. After all, upper extremity was not yet a deity king. There are also differences between deity kings. The rampaging sword will in Junmo's body belonged to the primordial realm. Upper extremity looked at the gloomy divine origin that was riddled with holes and surrounded by countless cyclones of sword Dao. The extremely sharp light rays were still cutting at it. Upper extremity had no choice but to bring Junmo back to the divine king of Tian Zhao's side. Perhaps there was a miracle that Junmo could survive. I'm a godly prince. My destiny is extraordinary. I'm destined to become an invincible existence in the future. Today, I actually lost to a trash. That bastard. He reversed my bloodline power. Tears of humiliation flowed from his eyes. Junmo, who was so weak that he was about to reach the end, had never felt so defeated before. Fighting with Qin Hao was even more humiliating than losing to the descendants of other divine kings. He knew that he had been too arrogant and condescending. It was precisely because he had never taken Qin Hao seriously that he had always thought that victory was within his grasp, no matter what had happened to him. It was precisely because of his arrogance that he had received an irreparable lesson today. Now that Tianlun's divine power had been reversed, was he still qualified to be the son of God of the Tian Zhao clan? Compared to this, defeat was even more unbearable for him. This would be Junmo's eternal stain. It would be like an eye-catching mark stuck on his face, and he would be mocked by all the living beings in the untainted universe. Shangji fell silent. Indeed, he couldn't find an excuse for Junmo because Junmo had indeed lost. He had lost completely. However, as long as he could return to Tian Zhao deity king's side, there was still a chance to salvage the situation. The innate deity king's power was the most mysterious existence in this world. Senior Shangji, wait for me. Shouts filled with fear came from behind. Tamanaji, who had just escaped from you, Demon Lord, was terrified. He was rolling and crawling as he frantically chased after Shangji. The ancient underworld strength was too terrifying. In today's battle, the two deity king factions couldn't even handle them. They even almost lost their lives here. Just the thought of it was terrifying. What can I do for you, Your Highness? Shangji held onto Junmo, whose divine source was on the verge of dissipating, and glanced coldly at Tamanaji. Junmo, they can still hold on, right? Tamanaji asked carefully. He also took a peek at Junmo's condition and was shocked. Thanks to Your Highness' blessing, His Royal Highness is still breathing. Shangji's tone was cold. If it weren't for Tamanaji turning a blind eye to Junmo's danger, Junmo wouldn't have ended up like this. Although Mo had underestimated his opponent, Tamanaji's actions were even more disgusting. In that situation, do you think your highness can save him just because he wants to? Yunza Bai Shen asked. Were the Tianluan of the ancient underworld's 4 realms just for show? If the upper extremity thought that strong enemies were mere decorations, then why couldn't they defeat the Azura and save Mo? Shangji glanced at White Deity and saw that one of his arms had turned into white bones. There was a very strong aura of death around it. Even someone as strong as White Deity could not reconstruct his flesh. Shangji immediately shut his mouth and did not say anything else. Everyone in the Yunzhe Divine Realm knew whether Mo could be saved or not. If Tamanaji didn't bring everyone to suppress you, Demon Lord, Mo wouldn't have ended up like this. Cough, cough, it's my fault. I thought Mo wouldn't be defeated so easily. Forget it. What's done is done. Now, saving Mo's life is the most important thing. As Tamanaji spoke, she saw Mo's lips opening and closing. Mo was so weak that he couldn't even speak. After a heavy sigh, Tamanaji said, Tianluan's power is twisted. If we bring him back to Tianzhao Deity King in this state, I'm afraid, Your Highness, Tiandu shouted, interrupting Shangji. Tamanaji's lips twitched, and he said, that Deity King's bone contains innate Sword Deity King's purest Sword Tao. It's not something that can be dispelled easily. Forgive me for being blunt, but according to Mo's situation, he won't be able to last until Tianzhao Deity King dispels the Sword Tao. Tamanaji wasn't sure if the Sword Tao could be dispelled. Just suppressing it would take a lot of effort. Sword Deity King and Tianzhao Deity King's Tao were on the same level, but Mo was on the verge of being killed by the Sword Tao. Tianzhao Deity King would have to be careful. To suppress and dispel Mo's Deity King's Sword Tao, the best way is to go to Sword World and have a strong sword cultivator unblock it for him. Actually, it's not a bad thing to be forcefully infused with Sword Tao. After all, this is the innate Deity King's Sword Tao. But I don't think anyone in Sword World will help Mo. Mo destroyed a celestial realm in Sword World. How could the sword cultivators in Sword World help him unblock his Sword Tao? Furthermore, according to Sword World's current situation, there weren't any suitable candidates. That God Lu and Long Ao's cultivation levels were still not high enough. They had to be at least half Deity Kings. Prince Yu, are you talking nonsense? Tiandu asked in a lifeless tone. Tamanaji smiled. He wasn't angry and continued. Just take it as nonsense. Other than the sword cultivators, there's another person who can help him. Who? Shangji's eyes immediately locked onto Tamanaji's face. Me. Tamanaji raised his head slightly. At this moment, the gods couldn't help but slow down, and their expressions all changed. You think it's impossible? Tamanaji could tell that Shangji and Tiandu didn't trust him. There's a bathhouse in Yunzhe Divine Realm that was created in the chaos. It hides the innate primordial Tao and has the effect of returning to its original state. It used to be a place to deal with criminals. When Tianluan, who committed a crime, was thrown into it, it would erase his godhead and melt his divine power, turning him into a mortal and returning him to his original state. As he said this, Tamanaji looked at the miserable Mo and said, although this might be a little hard for Mo to bear, it's still better than dying. Erasing his divine power, erasing his godhead, and returning him to his original state. Once Mo was thrown into the bathhouse, it meant that when Mo came out, he would lose his Tianluan and divine power, becoming no different from an ant in the mortal world. However, the bathhouse in Yunzhe Divine Realm was the only place that could erase the Sword God King's Tao will in the shortest time possible, because it was also a place of primordial chaos. The Sky Supervisor's expression became extremely ugly. Was he really going to throw the noble divine, Prince Mo, into the bathhouse to deal with criminals? Senior Shangji, listen to Tamanaji, take me to Yunzhe Divine Realm. At this moment, an extremely weak whisper came from Shangji's arms. Everyone looked over and saw Mo's tears of blood flowing from the corners of his eyes. How much courage did it take for the high and mighty divine prince to throw himself in a bathhouse, erase his divine power, and return to his mortal body? However, Junimo knew that Yunzei divine realm did have such a wonderful place. Moreover, in his current state, just as Tamanaji said, Junimo would probably be tortured to death by the violent sword intent before Tianzhao, divine king, expelled the divine king's sword intent from his body. Entering the bathhouse and erasing his divine power, Junimo did not want to do this, but he really had no other choice. Your Highness, is there really a need to do this? Shangji wanted Junimo to reconsider. Once he entered the bathhouse, how many years would it take for him to return to the divine prince of the divine realm from the mortal world? Yes. Junimo nodded with tears in his eyes, erasing the Tianluan and divine power, but not erasing their memories. This was the way to deal with criminals in the bathhouse. It made those high and mighty Tianluan remember who they were, but they would lose their previous cultivation. Sad. Now such a punishment had fallen on Junimo. However, he was different from those dirty criminals. He was a divine prince. He believed that the divine realm would provide him with everything he needed in the lower realm. Everything he would regenerate in the shortest way. Since Qin Hao was able to regenerate his Tianluan when his divine soul was on the verge of dissipating, could it be that Junimo was inferior to the bastard of the Senior Pill clan? He could also regenerate to become a god. When he returned to the divine realm, he would return the sins and humiliation he suffered today to Qin Hao 1,000 times, 10,000 times. This time, Junimo would make Qin Hao not even have the chance to regenerate. Okay, let's go to the Yunzei divine realm. Shangji took a deep breath and looked towards a corner of the wilderness. He was about to change the route back to the Archean realm. Leave Junimo to me. I will bring him back to the Yunzei divine realm. You and the heavenly supervisor are also heavily injured. You need to hurry back to the divine king and let him eliminate the murderous nature of the Azura and the Bone Dao law of the netherworld. Tamanaji opened his hands towards Shangji. Suddenly, Shangji paused and stared sharply at the divine prince of the Yunzei divine realm. He seemed to be thinking for them, but he had undoubtedly sent away all the people around Junimo. If Tamanaji wanted to do something now, the consequences would be, I am a divine prince. Junimo is already like this and is about to fall into a mortal body. What do you think I can do to him? Tamanaji was so angry that he wanted to laugh. Shangji was too disrespectful. Shangji did not reply. Instead, he lowered his head and looked at Junimo silently. When their eyes met, Junimo nodded weakly. Then I will leave it to your highness. I will report everything that happened today to the divine king of Tianzhao, including his highness's trip to the Yunzei divine realm. Shangji handed Junimo, whose divine essence was about to dissipate, to Tamanaji. The white god did not forget to activate the wilderness divine intent to stabilize Junmo's injured body. However, at the moment of separation, Shangji's words carried a hint of warning. He meant that if anything happened to Junimo, even the slightest accident, the Yunzei divine realm would definitely be involved. This would ignite a war between the divine kings. Chapter 2215. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The sleeping Ingsha and the awakened Myra divine light split into two. One headed towards the Yunzei divine land, and the other returned to the Archean world. Tamanaji had taken Junimo away. Whether or not he could eliminate the tyrannical Sword God King's sword was up to fate. Shangji and Tiandu were also seriously injured. They needed to return to Tianzhao, Divine King's side, and borrow the Divine King's will to eliminate the laws of Shura and Yellow Springs. This battle had a great impact on all three sides. Not only did they suffer heavy losses, but it also made the forces of the myriad worlds recognize the power of the ancient Nether region. Even though the Nether King had been dead for many years, Shura and Yellow Springs still had the strong foundation of the Divine King's forces. They could be bullied and bullied. It was not easy for any of the Divine King's forces to completely destroy the four worlds. Even if they put in all their effort, their vitality would be greatly damaged and they would not be able to recover, unless the Divine King personally came and broke the curse of the Nether King's will. In the Dark Palace, four powerful figures walked side by side. They walked through a deep and cold passage and arrived at the depths of Shura Palace. This was the absolute forbidden area of Shura Foam. The closest people of the four Nether Princes were buried here. Gently putting down the corpse in his arms, the evil Shura face looked at the Slayer who had been accompanying him all this time. The Slayer was peacefully lying in the black crystal coffin, as if he was sleeping. His expression was so calm. However, Shura knew that Slayer had left him forever, just like Shah. Slayer's life was taken away right in front of him. He was a good boy. He was loyal, fearless, attentive, and kind. Yellow Springs felt sorry for Shura and envied him because the Nether King had given Slayer, his servant, to his fourth son. The same perfect celestial wheel, the same pure, slaughtering divine power. Yomi had once wondered if the Slayer was Azura's shadow, or perhaps it should be said that he was their sixth brother. However, no one knew about this except for their father, the Nether King. Fourth brother, why don't you revive him? Umo asked. The Slaughter World had all sorts of traces of the Slayer. As long as the Azura was willing to help, he could grab a portion of the will of the way from the heavenly Tao and reconstruct the Slayer's spirit. Shura didn't answer. He shook his head slightly. He could resurrect the Slayers, but they wouldn't be the Slayers they used to be. The divine power of Tion Du was too strong. The law had already completely destroyed everything about the Slayers. The remnants of Tao that were captured from the heavenly Tao of the Massacre World could at most be pieced together into a fragmented person. How is that different from Puppet? After the Underworld War, the Azura's divine soul had been scattered. Guarding the Slaughter Realm was too lonely and too tiring. Just let him rest. He didn't leave. He will always be with me. Shura stared at the lifeless Slayer in the crystal coffin and revealed a warm and gentle smile. The Slayer would stay in the Azura's life. Just like the person in the crystal coffin beside him, he would always be here to accompany the Azura. At this moment, Huang Quan, Gue Di, and Umo subconsciously looked at the even larger crystal coffin beside them. It was carved with the Netherworld's red spider lilies. When their first glance fell on the quiet, beautiful, and slightly mischievous little face, their hearts trembled. They hurriedly lowered their heads, as if they wanted to avoid looking at it. They couldn't bear to continue looking at it. Inside this huge crystal coffin, which was emitting a strong cold air and seemed like it would never melt, slept a woman. She was the Nether King's most beloved princess, Ing Sha. So similar. Shura took a few steps forward and gently stretched out his hand to touch the sleeping Ing Sha's face. He recalled the scene when Miori had appeared. They were so similar, as if they had been carved from the same mold. However, at this moment he felt endless coldness from his fingers. Creak! Gue Di clenched his fists tightly. Intense hatred and killing intent appeared in his flickering eyes. The battle with the light, divine world had taken the lives of Ing Sha and many divine masters of the Netherrealm. Today, Jun Mo and Tamanaji had led the Divine King army and killed the Slayer. When did the Netherrealm, which was once famous in the Desolate Era and feared by all the Divine Kings, become so easy to trample on? It was tolerable. Relax your fists. Before you completely comprehend the Desolate Era and reach the Primordial Realm, don't let hatred drown your pitiful reason. Huang Quan glanced at Gue Di. Revenge on the current Divine King of the Light Divine World? Or fight his way into the Heavenly Order Divine Realm and the Cloud Pool Divine Realm? If Gue Di really wanted to do this, he might as well die under Fifth Sister's coffin. It was better than dying in the hands of others. Mo Tuesday, Shura called out. His voice traveled through the deep passage to outside the hall. Bring him in. Yes. Outside the Shura Palace, many divine generals and red-robed divine guards were busy suppressing their injuries. Qin Hao was one of them. At this moment, Mo2 looked at Qin Hao and nodded at him. Then, Qin Hao stood up and followed Mo2 into the hall. This battle was very intense. Although it looked like a stalemate, danger was everywhere. If any of the four divine kings were defeated, the situation would fall beyond redemption. If it wasn't for Qin Hao defeating Jun Mo and causing chaos in the Heavenly Order Divine King army, the outcome would be uncertain. Qin Hao stepped into the dark and deep passageway. This was not the path to the main hall. The light in the Azura Palace was weak, and there were many forks in the road. Each passageway seemed to represent something, and the destination was different. Qin Hao did not know where Mo2 would take him this time. As expected of the innate deity king bloodline, Tianluan and divine power were distorted by sword deity king's sword Dao, but Jun Mo didn't die on the spot. Qin Hao didn't know if Jun Mo was dead or not. Even if he was, he wouldn't be far from death. Even if Shang-Ji successfully brought him back to Heavenly Order Deity King, it wouldn't be easy to suppress Sword Deity King's Dao through the Deity King's power. This might cause Heavenly Order Deity King to kill his son himself. Being killed by his own father, how would Jun Mo feel? Qin Hao didn't have enough time, and his cultivation was limited. He couldn't cast the ultimate power of Sword Deity King's Dao Bone. Not only him. Back then, Sword Deity Wu Ji did the same. He fused the Sword Deity King's bone into his body, which caused the Tianluan to mutate and rise to the immortal grade, forming the Wu Ji divine world. In that battle, although Deity Lord Wu Jian was able to suppress Sword Deity King's power with the Deity King's bone, he was still no match for Shang-Ji. Talent, spiritual roots, and cultivation were all limited. Even with the innate Deity King's bone, Deity Lord Wu Jian's full power was limited. Just like Qin Hao, he wanted to kill Jun Mo, but his opponent's bloodline was too strong. The skeletons, evil spirits, and spirits that were distorted by the divine power were no match for Jun Mo. The skeletons were affected by the earth and would die instantly, whereas Jun Mo had the innate Deity King bloodline, which greatly offset the earth's effect. Even Sword Deity King's brutal sword couldn't kill him instantly. Following Mo2, the air grew colder and colder. Qin Hao felt like he was walking into hell. When he stepped into a huge tomb, he saw Shura, Huang Quan, and the others. In front of them was a solemn black crystal coffin. As they got closer, Qin Hao also saw the figure in the coffin. Almost instantly, Qin Hao's breath stopped, his eyes widened, and his heart stopped. Chapter 22:16. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Yuri's choice. She wore a phoenix coronet and a golden hairpin in a bun. She wore a bright red robe, and her dark red lips gave her an eerie beauty. The woman in the black crystal coffin was like a ghost bride sleeping peacefully. Qin Hao stared blankly at the woman who looked exactly the same as his senior sister. If not for the fact that the woman in the coffin had a completely different temperament from Yuri and that his senior sister's soul was in his heavenly wheel, he would not have been able to tell the difference. Could this be the princess who had fallen because of the Netherworld War? Aren't they very similar? The Azura looked at the sleeping Yingsha. Even though he did not turn around, he knew the expression on Qin Hao's face. Yes, they are very similar. Qin Hao nodded. At first, he did not understand the impact of his senior sister's appearance on the Azura, but now he understood. Her name is Yingsha. She was born in this world the same year, the same month, the same day, the same time. The moment we opened our eyes, the first thing we saw was each other. The Azura turned around and looked at Qin Hao. On the day of the war between the underworld and the light world, in order to save me, Yingsha was hit by the great light technique of the eldest son of the light god, who is the current divine king of light. Her soul was purified, and only this divine body was left. It was to protect his sister's divine body that the Azura's soul had been destroyed. He did not feel that it was a pity. On the contrary, he was filled with joy. At least when he was sad and had no one to talk to and no place to vent, he could still come here and confide in his sister. "I'm sorry. I feel sorry for you." Qin Hao did not know what to say. Even though he was not from the underworld and was not the brother of the Azura, he could completely stand in the Azura's perspective and feel the pain and sorrow. When he found out that Muri had fallen, Qin Hao felt the same as the Azura. However, he did not expect that it was a trap set up by Zhang Wu. The goal was to encourage him to move forward and help him become a god. Zhang Wu had his own difficulties. His original intentions were good, but Muri lost her imperial body because of this and became a ghost that was on the verge of death. Of the 7 peaks of the Divine Palace, Senior Sister was the only survivor of Migres Peak. She had lived and died with Qin Hao, just like a real sister. He could really understand Shura's feelings of losing his sister. However, why did he feel that the Azura's eyes had suddenly become strange? Don't tell me you're thinking of. Qin Hao was halfway through his sentence when he understood what the other party was thinking. He lowered his head and looked at the divine body in the crystal coffin. Indeed, Senior Sister needed a corporeal body. Furthermore, the divine body in front of him was extremely powerful. Fourth brother, you're not really planning to give little sister's body to her, are you? Huang Quan was slightly shocked. The she he was referring to was naturally Muri. Although they looked the same, they were not the same person. Why not? Shura looked at his eldest brother. Wait a moment, Senior Shura. I have something to say. I am extremely grateful for your kindness, but if you let my senior sister's soul return in another body, she will no longer be your sister when she wakes up and will not stay on Shura Peak to accompany you. My senior sister will have to follow me. Qin Hao had to make things clear. He did not want Senior Sister to obtain the divine body of the princess of the underworld, and then part ways with him and become a person of the slaughtering world. I know this. Shura answered without hesitation. Whether she goes or stays, I will not force her. The reason why I'm doing this is because I want to see Sha stand up again. Even if she lives as someone else's soul, as long as I have a chance to see her from time to time, that's enough. Hearing Shura's thoughts, Huang Quan, Gue Di, and Umo all felt their eyes sting. Yes, as long as Fifth Sister's body could stand up like before, what did it matter if her soul was Ing Sha or not? This could also be considered as fulfilling some of the regrets in their hearts. Thank you, Senior Shura. I really can't repay your kindness. Qin Hao's gratitude was indescribable. He really wanted to kneel down and kowtow to Shura. What a good god. Shura waved his hand and said, I don't need you to repay me. I'm doing this to fulfill a wish of mine. However, reviving her is easy, but reviving her perfectly is difficult. There is a difficult problem that requires you to make a choice. If you wanted to revive Muri, everyone present could do it, including Qin Hao. However, how to revive her, and how to revive her in the most perfect way, was a problem that had troubled Qin Hao for a long time. It was because he wanted to create a perfect body for Muri that he had not succeeded. I'm willing to listen to Senior's explanation, Qin Hao said. My sister Ing Sha is the daughter of the Netherworld King. She has a perfected Khanate Great Tao and a perfect heavenly wheel. Like me, she was born with the purest massacre divine power and the deathly aura of the Netherworld. Shura paused and continued. I don't know what kind of Tao the godly soul and your heavenly will cultivated in the past. However, Ing Sha's celestial origin and godly soul have only dissipated. Her godly body still retains the Tao and divine power from when she was alive. In short, if you want to revive your sister, you have to make a choice. You have to give up her bloodline and inherit my sister's power. Or you have to eliminate the murderous nature and massacre Tao, willing Sha's body, and let your sister retain her Tao. It's up to you. Lord, you demon interjected. After he finished speaking, he stared slyly at Qin Hao's face. The corners of his mouth curled into a sinister smile, as if he had already guessed the result. The body of the daughter of the Netherworld King, perfected great Tao, perfect heavenly wheel, profound Tao like Shura, and pure massacre divine power. How precious was that? In the Eldritch world, the perfect heavenly wheel alone was enough to make countless divine Tao ants envious. Although Ing Sha was dead, her godly body was still intact. she still retained the strongest part of the Netherworld King's Tao will, as well as the foundation of her Tao that was comparable to Shura's. How to choose? There was only to think about it. Lord Eudemon believed that Qin Hao definitely had an answer in his heart. After all, not everyone could forge a perfect heavenly wheel. Furthermore, after being revived, she could directly possess the power of a divine king and stand at the peak of the divine masters of the myriad worlds. Qin Hao's heart thumped. The godly body given by Shura was simply too powerful. However, his senior sister's bloodline was not bad either. She was one of the 14 primordial spirit gods and a descendant of the Phoenix god. Furthermore, she was filled with the power of the original realm. There was a high chance that she could forge a perfect heavenly wheel. However, in terms of Tao, she seemed to be too far away from the Netherworld princess who had fallen. It was really hard to choose. Seniors, is there a possibility that while my senior sister inherits Princess Ingsha's godly power and Tao, she can also preserve her own bloodline? Qin Hao didn't want to choose. He wanted everything. If you want her to die more thoroughly, that's a good idea. Shura's expression instantly turned cold. He had already given his own sister's body to the other party. What was he going to do? He still despised it? Did he despise Ingsha's massacre Tao for not being strong enough? Or was his Tao for not being strong enough? When the Tao wills clash and the divine source is released, only one source of power can be activated. I can't deny that you have obtained the ability to recreate Earth. However, even Earth cannot go against the laws of the primordial world, Lord Eudemon said. Sigh, what a pity. Qin Hao lowered his head and sighed. Huang Quan and the others couldn't help but want to beat him up. You can't make the decision. Just ask her and let her make her own choice, Shura said impatiently. All right, my senior sister should indeed make her own choice. Qin Hao's divine intent moved, and the wheel of light bloomed. A weak and blurry divine soul halo slowly appeared from the wheel of light. However, the moment Muri appeared, she didn't say anything. She only floated beside the crystal coffin and lowered her head to look at the person lying inside. The error-free chapters of Primordial Pill Venerate will continue to be updated in the new Book C Pavilion. There will be no advertisements on the website. Please bookmark and recommend the new Book C Pavilion. If you like Primordial Pill Venerate, please bookmark. Primordial Pill Venerate's new Book C Pavilion updates the fastest. Chapter 2217. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation, they had the same appearance, but different temperament. Fate made them look at each other between life and death, as if they were looking at themselves. How should they choose? Muri did not know either. Inheriting Ingsha's Tao will and heavenly wheel divine power would require them to abandon the Phoenix bloodline that was passed down from their ancestors. If it was placed on anyone else, it would be extremely difficult to cut off their bloodline with their clansmen. However, Muri was clear that inheriting Ingsha's Tao will and divine power, directly inheriting her perfect heavenly wheel, and overcoming the calamity of the Ascension God realm in the process, leaping to the peak of the Divine Master realm, would undoubtedly play an important role in Qin Hao's current situation. Thinking until here, Muri already had an answer in her heart. She turned to look at Azura and said, I am willing to abandon my bloodline and completely inherit the princess's power. Decisive, straightforward, and without any hesitation, Muri's reply caused Azura and the others to be slightly shocked. Senior sister, are you serious? Qin Hao asked. Muri turned to look at him and revealed a warm smile. The princess is perfect heavenly wheel and possesses one of the strongest divine powers in the netherworld. Such conditions are something that I can't even ask for. Although these were very valuable, they were only secondary. What Muri wanted to do the most now was to have enough power to help Qin Hao so that he would no longer have to wander around and hide everywhere. Qin Hao fell silent. Looking at Miao Li's beautiful eyes, he understood the true thoughts of his senior apprentice sister. He rejoiced at this. What virtue and ability did he have to have the best senior apprentice sister in the world by his side? Very good. This is also the result that I want to see. Azura finally smiled. If he only let his sister's body come back to life, but she lost her original aura and abilities, it would indeed make him very sad. Because when Yuri chose to keep her bloodline, she also undoubtedly wiped away the last trace of Ingsha in the world. The current result was really quite good. Even if his soul was changed, being able to see Muri using the Slaughter Dao was like seeing Ingsha in the world. I am now beginning to understand why you were so determined to help this kid, Sai. While Huang Quan shook his head and felt, his eyes flashed with intense expectation. Gue Di and Umo also faintly emitted a trace of excitement. All right, since you have decided, you're not allowed to go back. However, whether you can perfectly merge with Ingsha's body or not, it will still depend on this kid's ability. Azura, as he pointed to Azura and Qin Hao. Using ordinary methods, it was impossible to merge two living beings with Dao, while Azura art will. Even the divine, Azura divine God translation, divine God, Azura divine, divine king, Azura God translation realm, master, and translation realm. In a translation and translation, realm translation, realm in and realm earth, was a sure translation be realm. Was realm Assessora and realm, was that I sisters, senior sister, masters, senior sister, and princess, senior sister. Qin Hao became serious and slightly nervous. This matter concerned Muri's resurrection. He could not afford to make any mistakes. No, you can't do it. At least, you can't do it now. Uemo shook his head repeatedly. Your cultivation is too weak. You simply can't control the tyrannical slaughter, Dao, intent in my little sister's body. If you carry out the fusion now, this little girl's soul will definitely die in your hands. Gue Di was absolutely not joking. Moreover, Qin Hao's use of the filthy earth was not very good. It was still fine if it was used to kill people. He did not have to worry about it at all and could directly reverse the heavenly wheel and God power. The key was to save people. He had to do it perfectly. Then what should I do? Qin Hao was also at his wit's end. Ingsha's cultivation foundation was similar to Azura's. Could it be that he had to cultivate to become a divine king before he could transfer his senior sister's body and shape her soul? 10,000 years, 100,000 years, or 1,000,000 years? Or even longer? It's not too difficult. Azura took out the reincarnation mirror, which still had the blood of Slayer on it. He handed it over to Qin Hao heavily. Use the Chaos Divine Tool's reincarnation Dao to increase your cultivation as fast as possible. My netherworld itself has the power of reincarnation Dao. This is the best place for you to increase your cultivation. Other than that, Azura glanced at Huang Quan and the others. You need to follow my three brothers to cultivate the Dao of Bone, Dao of Soul, and Dao of Incantation. When you've condensed divine force, you'll be able to use filthy earth again, which will result in a qualitative leap. In the past, Azura did not understand what the filthy earth Dao will was. Now, he faintly understood that the existence of the filthy earth should be the combination of Father Hell's Dao will. In other words, the Azura killing path, the yellow spring bone path, the nether devil soul path, and Gue Di's necromancy curse were all part of the separation of the impure earth. When their Dao intents were combined, the impure earth would be produced. Maybe at that time, a new divine king would be born in the netherworld. The theory seemed simple, but it was more than difficult to implement. Even if Azura's bloodline could cultivate the Bone Dao and other Dao wills, would Huang Quan be willing to teach him? The four brothers were not willing to submit to each other, and at one time, they disliked each other. While they wanted to become divine kings, they certainly did not want the other to become underworld kings. However, with the arrival of Qin Hao, all of this was broken. Qin Hao was not from the netherworld, but his body was engraved with the shadow of the netherworld, especially the innate filthy earth divine power. If a new underworld king was born in the future, it would not be Azura or Huang Quan, but Qin Hao. Plop. Qin Hao, who did not respect ghosts or gods, nor heaven and earth, and was only willing to bend his knees to his parents and teachers, bowed solemnly to the four princes of the ancient Netherrealm. Seniors, I cannot repay the great kindness you've shown me and my sister. I'd like to be your apprentices and help me cultivate the supreme divine arts of the underworld. This, Huang Quan and the others looked at each other. They did not refuse to teach and were willing to lead Qin how to expand into a new realm. It did not matter if he repaid them or not. With a little imprint of the Netherworld, he could not get rid of it even if he wanted to. However, this kid directly knelt and became their disciple, which was out of everyone's expectations. It was quite grand. Get up. I will teach you the Bone Dao cultivation method. Huang Quan was the first to speak. The composition of your spirit seems to be quite complicated, and even I can't see through it. However, the more complicated the spirit, the easier it is to cultivate the soul Dao. You demon master suddenly noticed that Qin Hao's spirit seemed to have been reborn. The imprints were densely packed, and some were riddled with holes while some were shining brightly, as if he had been reborn more than once. I believe there is no need for me to teach you the ghost spirit incantation. You have already experienced it yourself. However, I indeed do not have a disciple. Since you are willing to be my disciple, I will reluctantly accept you. After Gue Di said this, he suddenly felt a sense of absurdity. As for the slaughter Dao, you have already achieved it, so there is no need for me to lead the way. You only need to understand life and death. Life is built on the foundation of death. Understand the meaning of slaughter. Only then can you truly control life. Shura knew that Qin Hao had cultivated the slaughter Dao the moment he entered the slaughter world. After such a long time, he had almost honed it to the extreme and had even derived his own law of slaughter, the God Execution Dao. Now, Shura had nothing else to teach, and Shura Feng's various resources had already been tilted toward Qin Hao. Teachers, is there really nothing else for me to do? Qin Hao raised his head, giving a favor without asking for anything in return. It was really rare for such magnanimity to appear in the netherworld figures who symbolized death and curses. There is. Shura's eyes suddenly shot out a ray of light. Just as he spoke, Huang Quan and the other two actually shouted the same word at the same time as Shura. If there comes a day when you really have the ability to attack Grand Mist, I hope that at that time, Shura stared at Qin Hao's eyes with extreme seriousness. Destroy the entire light world. Chapter 22:18. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Jun Mo is dead to understand the Edo Tensei. Qin Hao had to follow Huang Quan, Yu Mo, and Gue Di to learn the other three Taoist techniques of the underworld. By then, he would be able to understand the essence of Edo Tensei and help Miori's soul merge perfectly with Princess Ingsha's body. In the following days, Qin Hao fell into endless cultivation, learning the Bone Dao, Soul Dao, and Ghost Spirit incantation. During this period, he struck a balance between work and rest. Every few days, he would borrow the Mirror of Reincarnation to enter the Reincarnation Dao Rite to derive divine inscriptions. These busy days were very fulfilling. He didn't feel tired at all. In fact, the more he cultivated, the more energetic he became. In the past, Qin Hao was forced to cultivate the Slaughter Dao insight because he wanted to continue living. Now, he was eager to cultivate in preparation for his senior sister's rebirth. Time flew. In the blink of an eye, several years had passed. After Jun Mo and Tamanaji were defeated, Tian Zhao, Godly Domain, and Yun Zhe, Godly Domain, didn't continue to invade. The four realms of the ancient underworld were unusually peaceful. In this battle, Shura Feng lost several deity generals, nearly 100 red-clothed elites, and thousands of Tianlun soldiers. The death of Slayer was a heavy blow to the slaughter world and Shura Feng. However, Tian Zhao, Godly Domain, and Yun Zhe, Godly Domain, didn't have it easy either. The number of deity guards and deity generals was no less than the number of casualties in the four realms of the ancient underworld. Fenwei was abandoned. Tiani Master was hit by Umo Shun's soul-devouring law, and part of his soul was taken away. Even if he was saved, his cultivation was greatly reduced, and his soul was incomplete. Shangji, Tiandu, and Bai Shun were also badly injured. In the face of such a powerful counterattack from the four godly realms, unless Tianzhao, godly domain, and Yunzhe, godly domain, made up their minds and swore to destroy the four godly realms at all costs. Otherwise, it would be difficult to conquer them. Shura Feng's life returned to peace, but the slaughter world didn't let down their guard. No one could guarantee that Tianzhao, godly king, wouldn't come personally after this defeat. Especially, Junmo's injuries were almost irreversible. If he died, Tianzhao, godly king, would most likely come to the underworld. However, Shura himself was not too worried. The four realms of Massacre and Yellow Springs were heavily cursed by the Nether King. Even if a divine king were to personally come, it would not be easy to break the curse. After all, Junmo had tried to summon the God Kings when he was in danger. But the moment he arrived, he was cursed and dissipated. From this, one could see how terrifying the curse of the Nether King was. Azura believed that as long as they did not leave the ancient underworld, even the God Kings could not do anything to them. In addition, Guadi also had a big card in his hand that he could rely on. Because the ghost hunter often roamed around to commit crimes, the god ancestor of Mount Qinghua of the Archean world had sternly warned him to intimidate the ghost hunter. At that time, Guadi was naturally dissatisfied. But judging from the current situation, he very much wanted to be controlled by Mount Qinghua. Because as long as Mount Qinghua protected him, Tianzhao, godly king, would have to think twice before doing anything to him. After all, God Ancestor Qinghua was not an ordinary person. He was an innate primordial chaos godly king. Like Tianzhao, he guarded a corner of the Archean world and minded his own business. Therefore, Qinghua was very relieved. He cultivated in a frenzied state, forgetting about everything else. He only hoped to break through the 100,000-year barrier as soon as possible, because after 10 godly veins, the Tianluan would have a qualitative change. Only then could he reincarnate Muri with the help of Shura and the others. One senior sister had perfect control over Princess Ingsha's body and obtained her power. Qinghua would undoubtedly have another strong fighter by his side. He didn't dare to say anything else. But the Azura had once said that even an upper-level cultivator wouldn't be able to gain any advantage against Princess Ingsha. Just thinking about it made Qinghua excited and expectant. In the vast, untainted land, every star field was a godly realm. From the intensity of the light emitted by the star field, one could judge the strength of the living beings under the heavenly Tao. At this time, in the deepest part of the untainted land, in the most vast and dazzling star field, there were many godly kings that established their sects and passed down their Taos. This godly realm was extremely ancient, dating back to the beginning of the primal chaos. It was even rumored that this godly realm was the core of the primal chaos, and also the center of the untainted land. This was the place with the most godly kings, the immemorial godly realm. Qinghua Mountain, Wuji, Celestial Palace, War God Race, Tianzhao Race. These were the four innate primal chaos godly kings. Then, there was the Venerable Dan race that was gradually declining and forgotten by the world. In the past, the Venerable Dan race also had a godly king. 5 godly kings under the same heavenly Tao. How magnificent was that? In an entire untainted land, there was no godly realm that could compete with the immemorial godly realm. At this time, the immemorial godly realm ruled over a piece of land. The shape of this piece of land resembled a majestic and domineering divine seal. It was the land ruled by Tianzhao deity king. At the absolute core of the Tianzhao land stood a group of grand and majestic palaces. Tianzhao Palace. Tianzhao deity king had always been famous in the untainted land for his domineering and powerful style, and there was no one who did not revere him. Under his control, the Tianzhao divine realm was extremely strict. From the godly masters to the divine guards, Every word and action was very cautious. The entire core of the Tianzhao Palace exuded a supreme pressure of authority. And today, this pressure had increased to the point where it was suffocating and hair-raising, because a shocking piece of news had come from the Yunzhe divine realm. Junimo had died. Tianzhao deity king's only son had unfortunately died in the bathtub of the Yunzhe divine realm. Chapter 2219. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Tamanaji's misery. A palace that shone with a dazzling golden light stood at the highest point of the massive building complex. Down the palace was a grand path with countless steps, like a stairway to heaven. Golden God King flags with the Tianzhao divine seal were planted along the way. Today, the two sides of the grand path were filled with the figures of the God King Guard. They stood tall, wore golden armor, and wore red cloaks. All of them held cold and sharp spears in their hands. These figures lined up from the bottom of the stairway all the way to the palace's doors, especially in the 100-meter radius from the doors. The divine intent they gave off was stronger, and their armor shone brighter. If one looked through their wheels, they would be shocked to find that these figures all had at least 5 meridians of divine inscriptions. They were all at the divine champion level. This was the defensive force outside the Tianzhao Palace. After stepping through the door, the magnificent and dazzling hall was also filled with tyrannical figures. These figures in the hall had stronger auras than the divine generals lined up outside. Xian Shi and the 10 ultimates who had accompanied Junimo were among them, including the divine masters who had participated in the destruction of the infinite divine domain and stopped the Rikujinji and the true dragon beast army. Those who could stand in the same hall as Xian Shi and the 10 ultimates were obviously all divine masters. There were more than 100 of them in the hall, stretching from the doors to the domineering God King's throne. At the front of the 100 divine lords was an extremely stalwart figure. The aura of divine intent he exuded was as unfathomable as the primordial chaos. He was the strongest person below the godly king realm in the Archean domain, Shangji. It was not hard to see that these divine masters stood based on their strength. Xian Shi and the 10 ultimates stood in the middle, far away from Shangji. At this moment, Shangji's face was unusually solemn. His eyes shone with a sharp light as he looked ahead seriously. At the end of the hall, a muscular middle-aged man in his 40s sat on the God King's throne. This middle-aged man had a scar on his forehead. He looked dignified without being angry. His short hair made his domineering aura even more obvious. 2 figures stood on the left and right of the middle-aged man. The person on the left was the Sky Supervisor who had fought with Yellow Springs. As for the person on the right, his name was Hong Shao. His strength was on par with Tian. These two were the left and right arms of Tianzhao Divine King. The short-haired middle-aged man sitting on the deity king's throne was one of the 4 magnates in the supreme ancient realm, innate deity king, Tianzhao. At this moment, Tianzhao's eyes were coldly looking down at the hall below. Surrounded by a hall full of divine masters, there was a young man wearing white robes and a jade crown on his head. His entire body was so clean that it seemed like even the dust of the god realm couldn't stain him. He was crawling on his knees, and his trembling body told everyone in the hall that he was very uneasy. This person was none other than Tamanaji. Junimo was dead. He died in the Yunzhe divine realm, in the bathtub that Tamanaji had specially chosen for him, which was a place to deal with dirty criminals. And at this moment, above Tamanaji's head sat God King Tianzhao. One could only imagine how this divine prince of the Yunzhe divine realm was feeling right now. As long as Tianzhao had the intention to kill, he could wipe Tamanaji out of existence with just a wave of his hand. Afraid? Terrified? Of course. However, no matter how scared Tamanaji was, he had to come. If he didn't come and beg for forgiveness, he wouldn't be the only one to die. Everyone in the Yunzhe divine realm, including Saint King Yunzhe, wouldn't be spared. The hall was dead silent, cold, and extremely oppressive. Over 100 god lords of the primeval realm glared at Ulyoji. Any one of their gazes seemed capable of tearing him to pieces. On the other hand, God King Tianchao's expression was unusually calm, so calm that no one could guess what he was thinking. As he listened to Tamanaji's narration, God King Tianchao's gaze would only subconsciously look at the sky splitter in the sky supervisor's hands when he mentioned Junmo's name and the Tianchao seal in Hongzhao's hands. Although Junmo was dead, Tamanaji didn't dare to take these two divine items for himself. Today, he returned them to Tianchao Palace along with Junmo's body. I originally wanted to save him and use the pre-celestial primordial Great Tao in the bathtub to remove the tyrannical Sword King while in Junmo's body. Everything was going smoothly, and the sword was gradually being suppressed and wiped out. But who knew? Tamanaji clenched his fists tightly and lay on the ground, not daring to raise his head. Junmo's sword had indeed been removed, but an evil force was stimulated by the primordial Tao and grew more and more agitated. The cloud pool bathtub that could purify all divine Taos in the world had unexpectedly become the best place to catalyze this evil force. The sudden eruption of evil might had even alarmed Saint King Yunza. If not for Tamanaji's father's intervention, half of Cloud Pool Palace might have been engulfed by the evil light. And Junmo had died under the ravaging of the evil Tao. His scream before death was sharper and more terrifying than a ghost's. Tamanaji didn't know why this happened. What kind of existence was this evil force? After coming into contact with the primordial Tao, not only did it not calm down, it grew wildly. It seemed to be able to fuse with the primordial Tao and turn the bathtub into its own world. Tamanaji still couldn't help but shudder when he recalled the evil force storm that engulfed half of the Cloud Pool Palace. If Saint King Yunza hadn't intervened in time, the evil force might have used the primordial Tao in the bathtub to evolve into the deity King Tao. If that happened, even Saint King Yunza would have to flee. Fortunately, the father and son had suppressed the evil force at the perfect time. But Junmo couldn't be saved. His soul was completely torn apart by the evil force, and only a small part of his body was left. When Tamanaji came to deliver his body, he was still in awe. The deity king bloodline was indeed powerful. If it were any other Tianlin, they wouldn't even be able to keep a hair or a fingernail, let alone a small part of the body. However, this was Tamanaji's limit. He had worked very hard to save Junmo's body, and Junmo's death wasn't entirely his fault. Smack! A palm strike suddenly descended from the front of Ulyoji, sending him flying away with a horrifying power that was powerful enough to crush his soul and flesh. Amidst a shrill scream, Ulyoji's innate bloodline automatically protected its owner. The wheel of Great Tao emerged, and a faintly discernible, immortal-like green swamp enveloped his body. However, the moment this green swamp light wheel bloomed, it was instantly destroyed by the deity king's will. The divine masters present could clearly see that the three divine veins that surrounded Tamanaji's light wheel evaporated into thin air. Not a single mark was left behind. Almost as soon as the deity king's palm mark appeared on Tamanaji's face, his 30,000 years of cultivation in the divine Tao was destroyed. Bang! The heavy sound of a body crashing into a stone pillar rang out. Along with the clattering of pebbles, Tamanaji fell to the ground with a plop. He vomited large mouthfuls of blood. After collapsing, he convulsed violently and his body shrank. Does it hurt? But at least you're still alive. On his noble throne, deity King Tianzhao leaned forward slightly as he watched the son of Saint King Yun being thrown out of the palace. At this moment, Tianzhao's gaze was still very calm, as if he was doing something insignificant. Tamanaji's status was indeed very high, but in the eyes of the deity king, he was still an ant. Chapter 2220 114 Chinese Network Translator Endless Fantasy Translation Editor Endless Fantasy Translation Chapter 2220 Invincible the Divine King's helplessness. The Tianzhao Palace was as silent as a pool. Even Tamanaji, who had been crippled by a single palm strike, gritted his teeth and endured the spasming pain all over his body, not daring to make the slightest sound. Painful, very painful. However, just as the Tianjiao Divine King said, Tamanaji's cultivation had been crippled, but at least he was still alive. But Junimo was dead. Tap, tap, tap. Steady and powerful footsteps rang out as the Tianjiao Divine King slowly stood up, grabbed the sky splitter from the sky supervisor's hand, and walked down the steps, slowly approaching Tamanaji. Midway, he suddenly let out a cold laugh and said to the empty space outside the palace, "You watched your son being beaten and did nothing. Since you came together, why not show yourself, holy king?" Outside the magnificent Tianjiao Palace, flowing clouds brushed across the blue sky. After a while, a voice rang out, "Tamanaji deserves it. Even if you kill him now, I will have no complaints. Holy King is so magnanimous. Should I, Tianjiao, thank you?" The Tianjiao Divine King smiled coldly, turned his back, and said, "Take your son and get out. In the future, no one from the Yunzhe Divine Realm will be allowed to set foot in the Archean Realm. Likewise, the Yunzhe Divine Realm will no longer welcome cultivators from the Archean Realm," the voice in the empty space said coldly. Seeming to realize that there was a mistake in his words, he hurriedly added, "The other Divine King forces of the Archean Realm can enter the Yunzhe Divine Realm." The Tianjiao Divine King said no more, as if he was too lazy to respond. "Unfilial son, kowtow to the Divine King," the Holy King spat out harshly. Tamanaji endured the great pain, his twitching body crawling over the threshold of the palace with great difficulty, kowtowing to the Tianjiao Divine King. "Thank you, Uncle Tianjiao, for showing mercy." The Tianjiao Divine King seemed not to have heard, remaining cold and silent. "Farewell." As the voice faded away, a ball of dazzling divine light descended and enveloped Tamanaji. It rolled into the distance like silk. There, a dazzling divine cloud gradually disappeared into the distance. Soon, it left the primeval realm and headed towards the Yunzhe Divine Realm. "Your Highness, please bear with it." Within the divine light, Yunzhe, Godbai, and several other divine masters surrounded the heavily injured Tamanaji. They could feel the faintly discernible divine will of Tianlin, which was about to dissipate. In response, Tamanaji forced out a bitter smile. From his distorted facial features, it could be seen that he was in extreme pain. However, his eyes, which had instantly returned to normal, seemed to tell everyone that his state of mind was not affected at all. The white god looked at him and wiped away the sweat on Tamanaji's forehead. He couldn't help but look towards the front of the divine light. In front of everyone, a white-robed figure stood with his hands behind his back. He exuded a natural and ethereal aura, as if a connate saint had descended, causing everyone to feel reverence and worship. Their trip could be said to be extremely dangerous. If the Tianjiao Divine King wanted to kill, even 10 Tamanaji would die in the Tianjiao Palace. However, the white god noticed that the sacred king was also very calm, as if he was not worried at all. Could it be that the sacred king was certain that the Tianjiao Divine King would not dare to kill him? The white god could not guess. The game between divine kings was not simple. He glanced at Tamanaji, who had fainted from the pain. Tamanaji had a faint smile on his face. This smile was very twisted and strange. Was Junimo really dead? The white god recalled the evil light storm that swept through half of the Yunzhe Palace. Even someone as strong as him, who had comprehended the desolation will, trembled before the violent evil might. Junimo had fallen into such an evil might. Logically speaking, it was impossible for him to survive. However, what was the meaning of His Highness Yu's strange smile? The white god was confused. Perhaps only the sacred king knew the real answer. Were letting them go just like that? In the Tianjiao Palace, the sky supervisor was furious as he felt the Tao aura of the Yunzhe divine realm gradually fade away. Your subordinate request to wage war with the Yunzhe divine realm. I swear to avenge Prince Junimo Dong. In the palace, a divine lord knelt down. Your subordinate is willing to fight. Your subordinate is willing to fight. We are willing to follow in the footsteps of the sacred king and destroy the Yu clan's Yunzhe. Fight, fight, fight! A chorus of shouts shook the heavens. Everyone in the palace, including the sky supervisor and Hong Xiao, knelt down and begged to fight. With Jun Mo's death, if they did not wage a realm war, where would the Tianzhao divine realm's face go? Where would the dignity of the sacred king be placed? This battle had to begin. Hearing the deafening shouts, the god king of Heaven Edict could clearly feel the anger of his subordinates. However, his complexion remained as calm as ever. He also couldn't understand why Jun Mo had clearly died, but he couldn't feel even the slightest bit of sorrow in his heart. It was as if it didn't matter whether or not Jun Mo existed in Heaven Edict Palace. Disperse. After a long while, the Tianzhao divine king turned around and waved his hand at the kneeling divine lords. Immediately, a halo flashed around his body, and he disappeared before the eyes of the divine lords. Everyone was stunned. The divine king was not going to fight? This was completely unlike the Tianzhao divine king's domineering style. Disperse. Shangji stood up and exhaled the turbid air that had been suppressed in his chest. Then, a halo flashed around his body, and he disappeared. Tiandu and Hong Xiao looked at each other and smiled bitterly and helplessly. Knowing the divine king's temper, they knew that this battle would most likely not happen because the Tianzhao divine king was not in the mood to fight. Figures with powerful auras stepped out of the Tianzhao palace one after another. And at this time, the Tianzhao divine king appeared in a particularly luxurious room in a special palace garden within the luxurious palace complex. This room was the residence of the divine Prince Jun Mo. His sturdy body sat on a chair. Tianzhao held the sky splitter in one hand and the Tianzhao seal in the other. He looked at the colorful treasures in the room one by one. These were all birthday gifts that he had given to Jun Mo when he was growing up. Every one of them had a remnant of Jun Mo's aura. As he looked at the old items, the outline of a face appeared in his mind. It started as a child, then a teenager, then a young man, and finally Jun Mo's current face. The Tianzhao divine king seemed to be witnessing his son's growth all over again. In his ears, he could faintly hear the joyful cries of "Father." A son is truly a burden on the divine path. With a long sigh, the Tianzhao divine king placed the sky splitter and seal on the table. He slapped his forehead as if he was very vexed. At this time, Shangji was at the door. He did not say a word as he quietly looked at the Tianzhao divine king. It was only when the Tianzhao divine king spoke first that he stepped into the room. He pulled up a chair and very naturally sat beside the Tianzhao divine king. He said, "Jun Mo is really dead?" The Tianzhao divine king removed his hand from his forehead and nodded slightly. His bloodline connection with Jun Mo had been completely severed. Even the remnant auras of the old items in the room had gradually dissipated. This meant that Jun Mo's divine source and soul had completely disappeared. The bloodline that he had painstakingly nurtured was gone. "Boss, let's fight. If we don't fight this battle, you'll be too ashamed to show your face. All the divine kings will laugh at you," Shangji said solemnly. If the Tianzhao divine king really fought, he was willing to be the vanguard. During the divine king banquet, the divine kings established the iron rules of the wilderness. As the divine king's successor, Jun Mo repeatedly broke the rules. This has already caused the other divine kings to be displeased. The Tianzhao divine king looked at Shangji seriously. If they fought the divine kings now, it would be very disadvantageous for them. He was very likely to be punished by the divine kings. This was why the Yunzhe divine king dared to send his son over to ask for forgiveness. The divine king also knew that the Tianzhao divine king would not really kill Tamanaji. Shangji sighed. In the end, Jun Mo had brought this upon himself. Now, even the divine kings were involved. I only slept for a short few thousand years, but he caused so much trouble for me. Tell me, I want to hear everything from you. Although Tian Zhao could use a divine ability to open up the eye of primordial chaos and pry into the mark of time, Tian Zhao could not do it. However, he wanted Shangji Divine King to restore everything. What exactly did Jun Mo do in these few thousand years that made him become more and more arrogant? His Highness, he sighed. Shangji Divine King sighed again, then slowly explained. Because of the Mirror of Reincarnation, he first destroyed the Saint's spirit realm, causing the Thousand Saints' Dragon Palace to be displeased. Then, he attacked the Sword Realm and led the Divine King army to slaughter a divine realm. Everyone, from the Divine Lords to the disciples, died tragically. After that, it was the Massacre Realm. But Jun Mo had kicked an iron plate this time, and he had paid a painful price for his arrogance and impudence. But in the future, Jun Mo would never do it again. He would no longer be able to commit crimes and destroy other divine realms, because he was dead. Chapter 22-21 114 Chinese Network Translator Endless Fantasy Translation Editor Endless Fantasy Translation Translator Endless Fantasy Translation Editor Endless Fantasy Translation Tianluan's Heaven Sacrifice. The Massacre Realm was one of the main realms of the ancient underworld. It was connected to the Yellow Spring Realm, the Ghost Realm, and the Nether Demon Realm. Jun Mo knew that the Massacre Realm was very strong. That was why he teamed up with Tamanaji to take down this tough nut. However, when they fought, the Massacre Realm of the Four Realms still exceeded Jun Mo's estimation. Shangji also experienced this deeply. At first, Shangji thought that he was on par with Azura at most. Even if Azura was in his complete form, he would not be much stronger than him. However, after the fusion of the evil form and wisdom form, Shangji understood his own shortcomings. He was definitely not a match for Azura at his peak. After all, Azura only used 2 soul forms to suppress him. The battle was in a stalemate. Even with the help of the Yunzhe Divine Realm, they still could not defeat the enemy's main force. In the end, Jun Mo was careless and was severely injured by Qin Hao. In the end, the source was still Qin Hao. It could be said that Jun Mo's death was truly due to Qin Hao's Tao will. Tamanaji was unlucky enough to take the blame. The Mirror of Reincarnation is indeed a good thing. The God King of Heaven Edict listened carefully. Jun Mo was too greedy and impatient to succeed, which led to his own death. However, this was not the main point. The main point was Qin Hao. It seemed that since the Sword Realm, Jun Mo's actions had been led by the nose by Qin Hao. Every step of his meticulous planning revolved around Qin Hao. In the end, he suffered a crushing defeat. Tianzhao Divine King did not expect that the kid from the Pill Venerable clan that he let go of in the past would kill his divine prince in the future. Jun Mo was basically buried in Qin Hao's hands. That Ziti is indeed extraordinary. He is skilled in alchemy, sword, massacre, and... Shangji paused. And what? Tianzhao's eyes darkened. I vaguely saw the embryonic form of the ancient underworld king in him. Shangji's expression was extremely solemn. There was a hint of unease and fear in his voice. Alchemy, sword, and massacre. Qin Hao was proficient in all of these Dao. He had grasped the essence and was gradually approaching the art. Meaning, however, what truly made Shangji uneasy was the evil energy that filled his body. Hidden within the evil energy was an aura similar to that of the ancient underworld king. If he did not control it, Shangji did not dare continue. Are you worried that he will take over the netherworld and become the divine king? Tianzhao asked expressionlessly. Tianzhao Divine King. Translation Tianzhao Divine King Tianzhao. Tianzhao Divine King Tianzhao. Tianzhao Divine King. Tianzhao Divine King Tianzhao. Tianzhao, Tianzhao, translation of translation translation. The upper extremity was born from the primeval world's heavenly axiom and was a perfect living being. It was not a spiritual consciousness born from the heavenly decree. The primeval world did not have a true ruler. Tian Zhao, God King Wu Ji, God Ancestor Qing Hua, and God King of War, none of them could control the way of heaven of the Archean world. As for the upper extremity, he had perfected his great Tao under the heavenly Tao that even divine kings could not control. Now, the fact that it could make him feel uneasy and fearful was enough to prove the severity of the evil power. Where exactly did the energy of Tao insight come from? Tian Zhao thought hard. He descended from the Hongmeng, leaving behind the memories of the beginning of the chaos. The origin of all things in the primordial age was engraved in his spirit. However, he couldn't think of any god realm that could give birth to the evil force that the upper extremity spoke of. I'm guessing that it's not innate primordial energy. Instead, it should have been formed postnatally, said Shangji. Tian Zhao agreed with Shangji's theory because his innate spiritual consciousness could not find the source of the evil force. Sword Realm, a long time ago, Sword Realm was defeated by light. Who would have thought that I would become the natural enemy of Sword Realm? Tian Zhao shook his head and smiled bitterly. These innate deity kings did not have names in the beginning. Their Tao insights were like code names. Sword God King was called Sword. The one who killed Sword was Light. Junmo's vanity caused him to claim the glory on Tian Zhao's head as if the world would revere the Tian Zhao celestial race even more. What a joke. Go and check it out. I need to know the truth from Sword Realm. Tian Zhao slowly stood up. Junmo's vanity did not bring fear to Sword Realm. Instead, it provoked the sword cultivators to retaliate. Who was Sword Realm's natural enemy was no longer important. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was Tian Zhao. After all, his deity king army had destroyed the core of Sword Realm. However, Tian Zhao had to know the secrets of Qin Hao and Zhan Wu. Back then, the brats from Senior Dan and war god races Tian Luan were not perfect. After 10,000 years, they were able to forge perfect Tian Luan and ascend to the peak of the celestial level. As for Qin Hao's evil force, it was definitely related to his perfect Tian Luan. Perhaps it was the truth behind the birth of the evil force. Yes, Shangji accepted the order and left. Now, he understood the deity king's intention. Tian Zhao would not start a war with Yunzhe. However, the deity king was determined to eliminate the senior Dan brat. If not, Junimo would have never died, and Qin Hao would have been the root of the problem. King of Hell? It's not that easy. Looking at Shangji's back, Tian Zhao's broad hand gripped the heaven-splitting staff. It was a taboo for a postnate being to cultivate into a deity king. Not only would he not allow it, the other deity kings would also not want to see Underworld return to its peak, especially in the Light World. It seemed like he would have to make a trip to the Light World to break the Hell King incantation and drag Qin Hao out of the Slaughter World. The best way to do so was to use the Underworld's natural enemy's power. Light, not only did it kill Jian, it also killed Ming. Now, it all depended on whether the current Light eldest son had inherited his father's methods, and whether he could stand shoulder to shoulder with the innate deity kings. Slaughter World, Qin Hao cultivated day and night. In order to make it easier for him to preach, Huang Quan, Gui Di, and Umo did not leave Azura Peak. Instead, they stayed here for a long time. Also, because of Miao Li, they were also very willing to stay behind. When they imparted the Tao to Qin Hao, they would request him to release Miao Li's divine soul. When they looked at Miao Li, it was like they were looking at their younger sister in Sha. At that moment, their hearts were filled with sweetness. Bone path, soul path, ghost spirit incantation, no one held back. It was unknown if they had reached some kind of agreement with Azura in private, but when they were teaching Qin how their path of path, Huang Quan and the other two were very strict in their methods. They had to make sure that Qin Hao met all of their requirements perfectly. Otherwise, they would mete out punishment. The feeling was very unbearable for Qin Hao. It was an inhumane torture. However, in the words of Huang Quan, Umo, and Gui Di, bearing the bone Tao, soul Tao, and curses was also a kind of cultivation. Therefore, Qin Hao did not have to resist. He had to accept their curses and blessings with a happy and grateful heart. Qin Hao didn't feel tired at all when he cultivated without eating or sleeping. In the past few decades, with the help of the reincarnation device spirit, Qin Hao had evolved the fifth divine vein of the heavenly wheel. He was one step closer to reviving his senior sister. And today, Shura, Huang Quan, Gui Di, and UMO were going to test Qin Hao's 4 underworld powers in a real battle. They would let him decide the life and death of his soul. Chapter 22:22. The dark dungeon was damp and cold, and the air was filled with a strong, moldy smell of blood. The mottled walls were covered with scratches, as if they had been scratched out by nails. There were clotted blood clots left in the scratches, and the appearance was terrifying and ferocious. Looking at it made one's hair stand on end and shudder. Along the passage swept by the cold wind, there were countless wails that sounded like the cries of angry ghosts. It was as if there were countless lunatics locked here, and their rationality had been forcefully wiped away, leaving behind only madness. At this time, a ghost official with a bull head, a stocky back, and a strong body was almost naked, with only a tattered piece of gray cloth wrapped around his waist. He held a blood-stained departed soul axe in one hand and a long soul restraining chain in the other. Behind him, he dragged a large group of souls dressed in mourning clothes forward slowly. At the back of the group, there were countless ghost guards with hooked blades following closely behind, escorting the remaining souls of the Azura Peak battlefield. These souls and godly bodies have been blasted apart. Some belonged to the Tianzhao army, while others came from the Yunzhe godly realm. Their identities and cultivations were all different. Originally, UMO Master wanted to keep the souls of these enemies and prepare ingredients to nourish himself. But now, they were put to a new use. They were used for Qin Hao to use Edo Tensei for actual combat practice. The power of Edo Tensei could reverse the heavenly wheel Dao will, and could save people, creating a miracle of perfect reincarnation. The path of reincarnation was different from reincarnation. It could allow the soul to fuse with another body while retaining its current cultivation. The latter would have no cultivation, and everything would have to start from scratch. The cold wind blew, and the dark and cold passage was terrifying. Terrifying wails came from the end, as if it led to Azura hell. The god generals and god guards under the Tianzhao godly king did not know where they would be brought to, but from the looks of the situation, it was definitely not a good thing. Their godly bodies were destroyed in battle, and their souls were bound by the soul restraining chain. If Junimo did not send anyone to save them, they would not be able to escape. On this Azura Peak, they could only resign themselves to fate. Soon, under the escort of the ghost officials and ghost guards, this group of divine souls was brought to the depths of the dungeon. They were locked into small cells one by one, and then the soul-sealing curse was cast on them. In the end, there was only one person left in the hands of the Minotaur ghost official. He dragged the divine general of Tianzhao's soul and dragged it into the deepest dungeon while muttering to himself. Azura, Nether, Guadi, and Umo, the 4 great gods, sat side by side on chairs. In front of them stood a silver-haired young man in white. When the spirit of the Tianzhao divine general saw Qin Hao, he suddenly shuddered. He felt that Qin Hao was like a doctor who was about to attack him. Divine Lord, the divine soul, is here. The ox-head ghost official seemed to be very slow-witted, and when he opened his mouth to speak, he sounded very slow. "And you may leave. Take good care of the rest." Guadi waved his hand at Niu Shi. Among the ghost realm, there were naturally ghost beasts. They were very loyal, and their resentment was relatively strong. Their methods were also relatively ruthless. Therefore, they were often arranged as prison guards to watch over the vicious ghosts and evil spirits for the ghost divine lord. At this time, Azura's gaze fell on Qin Hao. Next to Qin Hao, there was a stone platform with a corpse placed on it. This corpse was tattered, with deformed facial features, and limbs twisted together like a fried dough twist. It exuded a very strong ghost resentment power. It was a ghost general who died in the previous battle. Let's begin. Azura motioned to Qin how to proceed. Next, Qin Hao wanted to plant the divine general of Tianzhao's soul into the corpse of the ghost general who died in battle. During this process, the Edo soil would erase the divine general's original soul and let him inherit the ghost resentment power of the ghost general. If this soul could perfectly integrate with the corpse after it was formed, it would prove that Qin Hao had succeeded. It would undoubtedly be a good start for the resurrection of Muri. But this was just a fantasy. Azura and Yellow Spring knew that basically, Qin Hao would not succeed easily. If he wanted to perfectly unleash the Edo soil reincarnation path, he would need to keep trying. It did not matter. If the first time did not work, he could try again. Azura Feng had imprisoned many souls. If it was not enough, he could go to the small sect in the Tianzhao God domain and capture some more, until Qin Hao completely honed the Edo soil reincarnation path. Qin Hao nodded and slowly turned around. He looked at the divine general of Tianzhao in white mourning clothes. He was just a soul, and his godly body was shattered in battle. But Qin Hao had no sympathy. "What are you going to do to me?" Facing Qin Hao's cold eyes, the divine general of Tianzhao looked at the ugly corpse on the stone platform and swallowed hard. Although there was no taste in his mouth, and he was just a soul, he still felt uneasy and afraid. "I will erase everything about your cultivation in the Tianzhao God domain and inherit the ghost spirit great path. If I succeed, then congratulations. After your resurrection, you will serve Senior Guadi and become the ghost general of the ghost domain," Qin Hao said calmly. Turning the enemy into a subordinate, erasing everything about him, branding him with the power of the ghost path, and turning his former companions and elders into mortal enemies. From then on, the divine general of Tianzhao would no longer believe in the Tianzhao God King. He could only believe in Guadi. Could this be considered a punishment in disguise? "No, you can't do this. Although I was defeated and imprisoned, I still have the dignity of the God path. Give me a quick death and kill me," the divine general of Tianzhao shouted with all his might. His eyes were bloodshot, and his emotions affected his soul, causing his soul to become ethereal and almost dissipate. He would lose the glory of being a divine general of Tianzhao and become an ugly, evil spirit. He would be branded with the will of the ghost domain and have to fight with his family, wife, and children. He would rather die. "Why are you talking so much nonsense?" The Yumo master was annoyed by the noise. He waved his hand, and an invisible will of the God path pressed down. The divine general of Tianzhao seemed to have his mouth sealed and could only shut up and let out a series of useless whimpers. Plop! He knelt on the ground and kowtowed to Azura, Nether, and the other three. His innocent expression seemed to be saying that he was ordered to attack the slaughter domain and that the order was given by Jun and Mo. He was ordered to do so and had no choice. He should not be tortured and punished like this. There are many things that can't be regretted. When you took on the responsibility of the divine general of Tianzhao, you also had to bear the corresponding consequences of your actions. Qin Hao would not sympathize with him. Innocent? Were the sword cultivators of the sword world innocent? When the Tianzhao army destroyed the entire academy, they did not say that they were unwilling. On the contrary, they were very willing to work for Junmo and even fought to make great contributions. But now, their souls had landed in Qin Hao's hands, and they were saying that they had no choice. What a joke. He's just an ant. You don't have to care about him. Just do it. Nether was a little impatient. He was eager to see the magical effects of the Edo reincarnation. With the fall of the Netherworld King, this kind of divine Tao was already lost. Next, Qin Hao would reappear the Netherworld King's strongest Tao will divine ability in front of them. How could Nether not be excited? The Yumo master stared at the kneeling soul. A divine light flashed across his eyes as he saw through the other party's cultivation. This person had 7 immortal grade meridians and was considered to have some strength among the ordinary heavenly wheels. As for Qin Hao, he had just come out of seclusion from the reincarnation ritual ground and had evolved the 5th immortal meridian of his heavenly wheels. Compared to this person, he was 20,000 years weaker. But in reality, there was basically no difference between the two. If they really fought, Qin Hao should have the upper hand. After all, the grade of his heavenly wheels was much higher than the other parties. Under such circumstances, Qin Hao, who had perfect 5 immortal meridians, should have no pressure to perform the Edo reincarnation for a 7 immortal grade soul. Let's see to what extent he could perform it. Chapter 22-23. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios' The Light of the Great Tao was released, and the grayish-white evil aura seeped out from the demonic emblem on his shoulder. It formed an evil spirit that swayed behind Qin Hao. Instantly, wails rang out in the torture chamber, and an oppressive aura that could drive people crazy enveloped the room. The eyelids of Huang Quan and the others twitched slightly. Even though this was not the first time they felt the evil aura, as Qin Hao's cultivation gradually deepened, this evil aura gave them a faint sense of oppression and threat. Qin Hao's pitch-black eyes were quickly covered by the whites of his eyes. 5 divine pattern light rays revolved around the wheel light, and the evil power of the heavenly wheel in his body became more and more turbulent. Then, ignoring the begging of the kneeling divine spirit, Qin Hao stretched out his palm, and a thick evil light spread out and covered the divine spirit. A miserable scream rang out in the torture chamber. As the evil aura compressed and merged, the Tianzhao divine general's divine spirit became a ball of light in Qin Hao's palm. During this process, the Tianzhao divine general tried to resist, and with his will to die, he unleashed an intense attack on the divine spirit. On the other hand, the evil aura on Qin Hao's body only shook a little before immediately stabilizing. When you erase the divine spirit's Tao, remember to keep it intact. You cannot damage it at all. Even the slightest bit of damage can cause the reincarnation to fail, and it will become a defective product. Azura watched as Qin Hao made his move and reminded him of the details that he needed to pay attention to. The evil aura around Qin Hao was like a rolling river, and it surged and gathered in his palm. His expression was serious, and it was as if he had transformed into a strict sculptor. He used the evil aura as a knife and seriously carved the Tianzhao divine general's divine spirit. When he was removing the divine spirit's Tao, he carefully polished it over and over again. The ball of divine spirit light in his palm became even more sparkling and translucent under the carving of the evil aura. It was like a top-grade jewel that had been polished from raw jade. As the divine spirit's Tao was removed, only the nature of the divine spirit was left, and this ball of light shone brightly. This kid's technique is not bad. Lord Yumo nodded happily, expressing his approval. All right, you can pour it into the corpse now. Huang Quan said, next, you need to be even more careful. When the soul fuses with the ghost body, not only will it fuse with the Tao in tint and flesh, but it will also fuse with its bones. The body parts of the soul must overlap with the corpse's bones perfectly, allowing his life imprint to completely seep into it. Beads of sweat gradually appeared on Qin Hao's forehead. The difficulty of this operation was extremely high. Every step required him to constantly pay attention to the state of his divine soul to ensure its spirituality. He would then fuse the spirituality bit by bit into the divine bone. Indeed, the decades of cultivation weren't wasted. Your control over the divine soul is already at 20% of my standard. Yumo Master slapped his thigh in satisfaction. Azura glanced at Yumo Master. There was a limit to bragging, all right? He didn't deny that Qin Hao's mastery over the divine soul wasn't comparable to Yumo's. However, even though it seemed like decades, Qin Hao had been training in the reincarnation Tao right for hundreds of years. He had already condensed the other 3 types of divine power: bone divine power, soul divine power, ghost spirit curse power, and Qin Hao's massacre god power. Who would have thought that this kid had only been in the massacre world for 200 years? Even if he was a genius with a perfect heaven wheel, condensing 4 types of divine power in 200 years was already shocking enough. Although Qin Hao had the help of the reincarnation mirror, it was enough to see that he was extremely hard-working in his cultivation. The ball of light in his palm continued to shrink. The gossamer-like soul threads slowly fused into the tattered corpse in front of Qin Hao. The ghost corpse that originally didn't have any aura started to emit the rhythm of life. Its flat chest started to rise and fall. Its dry mouth let out weak breaths. The entire corpse started to flicker with mottled brilliance. In this moment, Qin Hao's exhaustion decreased at a terrifying rate. His state gradually became unstable, and his palm started to tremble. Qin Hao's brows were tightly knitted together as large beads of sweat rolled down his face. Qin Hao's wheel suddenly exploded with light. 4 streaks of godly power emerged from the divine patterns and revolved together with the heavenly wheel. Only then did he manage to stabilize his condition. His cultivation is still a little weak. Yellow Spring knew that the Edo reincarnation had caused Qin Hao to expend a lot of energy. It was still a little difficult to control a 7-meridian divine soul. The next step is to raise the spirit. The reason why the ghost Tao can awaken the fear and obstacles in people's hearts is because it is the source of nature. When placed in the heaven wheel, it represents divinity. Guidi took over from Yellow Spring and the others. He began to direct Qin Hao because the next step was his field of expertise. The divine soul had merged with the corpse. Qin Hao's soul control ability was recognized by UMO. It was also carved into the ghost bones. And the last step was to raise the spirit, awaken the divinity of the divine soul, and completely activate the corpse. Buzz! At this time, the ball of light in Qin Hao's palm had completely disappeared. The ghost corpse lying on the stone platform let out a violent heartbeat. The eyeballs under the closed eyelids seemed to be turning quickly and were about to open. Qin Hao let out a deep shout. His divine sense guided the ghost spirit power in the heaven wheel and pressed his palm on the ghost corpse's chest. In an instant, as the ghost spirit's Tao intent connected to the divine sense, the corpse lying quietly on the platform suddenly trembled. The closed eyes suddenly opened. The gaze containing mournful and bitter resentment made Qin Hao's heart tighten. Did it succeed? Qin Hao wiped out the Tianzhao divine general's Tao intent. While protecting the other party's divine soul and preserving its memory, it perfectly blended with the ghost corpse's body, bones, blood, and heaven wheel to raise the spirit. The reincarnation ceremony was over. This was the first time he controlled the life and death of a divine soul. Success was very important to Qin Hao because it was related to the resurrection of his senior sister. However, the moment the ghost general opened his eyes, a tragic scream came out of his broken mouth. The sound was so loud that Qin Hao's head buzzed, and he subconsciously retreated to the side. Qin Hao retreated, but Azura, Nether, and the other 3 stood up. They looked at the ghost general's corpse on the stage. As the Tianzhao divine general's soul fused into the corpse, it began to convulse violently. It was like a zombie that had come to life, twisting and contorting. In the end, it did not struggle for long before a mist of blood exploded. Broken bones pierced out of the corpse. The sharp broken bones shot out in all directions, stabbing into the walls of the torture chamber. The entire room was covered in blood. Huang Quan sighed and rolled up his sleeve to wipe the blood splattered on his face. As expected, the reincarnation had failed. Guidi and Umo also had a look of regret. Perhaps their expectations of Qin Hao were too high. They always wanted to create a miracle for the first time, but in the end, they still couldn't break free from the cage of failure. The Shura stood there quietly, allowing the broken organs to hang on his body. He turned a blind eye to them, as if he was thinking. He carefully recalled every step he had taken, as if he was trying to figure out the reason. This doesn't make sense. Qin Hao's face was gloomy as he looked at the remaining flesh on the platform. The Tianzhao Divine General's divine soul had suffered a backlash from the ghost corpse's Tao intent and had completely disappeared. Every step he took was strictly according to the guidance of his four teachers. In his opinion, even if the reincarnation failed, at most the Tianzhao Divine General would be reduced to a defective product. He should never have exploded his corpse. Now, his divine soul didn't exist. Just where did the problem occur? Chapter 22-24. Translator. Atlas Studios Editor. Atlas Studios, the atmosphere in the torture room was very quiet. Everyone was thinking and filtering every detail in their minds. The Tao of Massacre's life and death, the Tao of bone, Tao of soul, Tao of ghost curse and spirituality, the four Tao intents of the netherworld formed the impure earth and gave it a brand new Tao of reincarnation. Qin Hao's technique and control of Tao intents were flawless. Looks like we have to try again. Azura looked at his three brothers. Huang Quan and the rest nodded silently. Maybe even they missed something. Since they couldn't find the root of the problem, they had to practice again. This was the most direct and effective method. Next time, we have to be extra serious. Keep your eyes open. Huang Quan pointed at Qin Hao. And you have to be more serious too. I'm already very serious. Qin Hao had an innocent expression. How could he not be serious when it concerned his senior sister's reincarnation? How could he not be serious? Fortunately, he had practiced beforehand. Otherwise, he would have reincarnated his senior sister. Just from that tragic corpse explosion, it was too late to regret. It was simply unimaginable. All right, return to the reincarnation Tao ground and continue to improve the four Tao intents. It's best if you can completely condense the impure earth divine power. Azura waved his hand and said, the impure earth was hidden in the evil intent and had yet to fully form. When Qin Hao reincarnated, he mainly relied on the four types of divine power of the netherworld to guide the evil aura and move the hidden impure earth. The problem might have arisen here. Qin Hao drooped his head and walked out of the torture room with heavy steps. Did he not want to condense the impure earth divine power from the evil aura? Did he have enough time? In just a few decades, he had raised 3 brand new Tao intents in the reincarnation mirror. He was already very hard-working and diligent. You little brat, wait for me. What's wrong? Do you have resentment? You devil master chased after Qin Hao in a few steps and grabbed his clothes from the back. He changed his angle and looked down at Qin Hao with a dignified face. Now, Muri had become a girl in Yumo's eyes. Qin Hao's mentality couldn't be like this. What if an accident happened? Furthermore, there was only one set of Ing Sha's corpse. Such a good divine body with almost the same appearance could not be found in the primordial world. No, how could I have any resentment? Qin Hao put on a silly smile, but he felt bitter in his heart. If he hadn't had the experience of creating the dragon spirit Dharma idol, he probably wouldn't have been able to complete it today. Don't pressure yourself. When you're needing your spirit, just be like a tailor and sew a piece of clothing. Huang Quan glared at Yumo. He had just suffered a defeat, so she didn't want to add to the young man's frustration. It was understandable that he was a bit angry after being scolded, but it wasn't the style of an elder to put more pressure on him. Imagine yourself as a tailor sewing a piece of clothing. Qin Hao suddenly felt that Senior Yellow Springs analogy was very appropriate, and it was full of philosophical depth. It was worth thinking about. Boom! An extremely terrifying vibration came from beyond the 9th heaven. Even with the protection of the God World's power, this terrifying power still penetrated the way of heaven and affected Azura Foam, causing the prison deep below to have a strong feeling of collapse. What's going on? Qin Hao suddenly looked up, extremely shocked. However, he found that Azura, Huang Quan, Gue Di, and Umo were all petrified, as if they had lost their souls and were frozen in place. Gradually, anger appeared on the faces of the 4 godly lords. That anger was like a wildfire that could burn the plains and burn away their rationality. Azura's black hair fluttered crazily, and a mass of murderous black light that could freeze everything raged out of his body. Huang Quan's flesh and blood seemed to be quietly melting, and the powerful purple-gold godly bones vaguely appeared under his peeling skin. Umo seemed to have turned into an ethereal shadow, and a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood appeared on Gue Di's back. The four godly princes of the ancient nether realm involuntarily entered their strongest battle state when the earth-shaking vibration came. In their anger, Qin Hao felt extreme hatred. That hatred was even more intense than the flames of anger. In the depths of their ferocious eyes, there was also a trace of fear quietly spreading. Wong, 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 Wong. Without any answer or explanation, the four godly lords of Azura's bodies disappeared from the underground prison at the same time, along with Qin Hao. When they reappeared, they were collectively suspended in the void, looking in the direction beyond the way of heaven. In a seemingly distant place, there were two vast masses of divine light flashing. At that moment, Qin Hao finally understood why Azura and the others had undergone such a drastic change. Pure light enveloped the endless universe and shone from afar, as if it had penetrated the way of heaven and shone on Azura Feng and the other three godly lords. This mass of light was extremely pure. Walk the Great Way. It did not contain any trace of impurities and was only composed of light. It was as if this was the innate light that was born at the beginning of the chaos. Inside this ball of light, a figure could be vaguely seen. It was graceful, noble, and had the same elegant silver hair as Qin Hao. It was wearing an incomparably holy robe. This robe was dazzling and was completely composed of pure and flawless light. As it fluttered, the light particles that overflowed in all directions seemed to be able to envelop the divine world. As for the figure's face, it was impossible to see clearly. However, Qin Hao already had an answer in his heart. Light, godly king. His voice trembled slightly, and the heart of the godly source in his chest was beating more intensely than ever before. Qin Hao looked at the light figure outside the way of heaven across the vast, untainted land. The spirit that stood between heaven and earth seemed to be able to crush everything in the universe. This was the aura of a godly king. It gave people the feeling that he was omnipotent, that he could win any battle and could only be controlled by him. Moreover, there was more than one. Right beside the mass of light, there was also a stalwart figure. The figure that exuded the godly what was like a primitive giant. It held a king's seal in its palm, showing an endless, domineering aura. Although it was impossible to see the figure's face clearly, Qin Hao would never forget just by feeling the aura. No matter how many times he had recultivated, when this domineering and fierce aura descended, it would instantly awaken his past. Because that was Junmo's father, the divine king of Tianzhou. At this moment, everything was silent. Normally, if there was even the slightest provocation, the black-robed divine guards would jump out like ghosts. However, at this moment, not a single black figure appeared. On Azura Peak, there were not only Azura guards who were not afraid of death, but also the fiercest ghost general of the ghost region, the most mysterious ghost soul of the nether demon world, and the disrespectful giant bone spirit of the netherworld world. However, at this moment, they were all nowhere to be seen. The godly kings came in person, and the innate suppression of the Creator crushed all living things in the massacre world. Only Azura, Nether, and the insignificant Qin Hao dared to face the endless light of the two godly kings and stand in this dilapidated world. The error-free chapters of Primordial Alchemy Venerable will continue to be updated in the new book pavilion. There are no advertisements in the website. Please bookmark and recommend the new book pavilion. If you like Primordial Alchemy Venerable, please bookmark. Primordial Alchemy Venerable's new book pavilion updates the fastest. Chapter 22-25. Because of the Nether War, the Nether Realm had lost the glory and absolute power that a God King faction should have. Azura Peak's current desolation and desolation was because it was once an ancient battlefield. In the past, Prince Azura was pure and kind. His territory was filled with flowers, and the cleanest water from the river Styx flowed in it. He used his gentleness to create a home that was more beautiful and peaceful than any paradise in the divine world. It didn't look like a world of slaughter at all. But all of this was destroyed by Ming Zhan. Even Azura's kindness was torn apart and buried deep in his heart. From then on, there was no more Prince Azura. There was only the cold Azura god that symbolized death and slaughter. This battle had completely changed the Azura clan. The two innate deity kings were burned together. Countless underworld deities disappeared. Even Princess Ingsha was buried in the flames of war. Azura's divine soul was destroyed, and the culprit from back then was right in front of him. His eyes, which were as dark as the abyss, were filled with extreme hatred. Shura's robes fluttered in the wind as he stared at the light eldest son, who had become a god king before him. It was as if he had returned to the day of the Netherworld War. The sounds of battle filled the sky, and the divine light techniques blasted through the entire world. They destroyed the red spider lilies that covered the ground below Shura Peak and evaporated the pure water of the Netherworld River. In the light, countless underworld warriors died. Every memory was like a cruel knife that cut into Azura's body. It left him with wounds all over his body until it pierced into his heart. No wonder. Qin Hao looked at the four gods silently. His mortal enemies had met again. The four deity princes of ancient underworld had such strong emotions. At this moment, Qin Hao was unusually quiet. He didn't dare to say a word. Under the radiance of the two deity kings, any words would be too weak and useless. If he didn't have the protection of the realm force, if the ancient underworld king didn't bury the curse before he died, Qin Hao would probably be a dead soul under the deity king's radiance. They want to break father's curse. Yellow Spring's eyes turned hollow. His flesh, that was about to melt away at any moment, was filled with a strong purple-gold bone power. Just now, there was a world-shattering sound. Even the heavenly Tao was about to collapse. Clearly, the other party had sent down a peerlessly powerful God King Tao art. Now that Azura phone was safe and sound, it proved that the godly king law had been blocked by the world power. This was the effect of the dark incantation. The dark incantation was hidden within the realm force, and its target was the deity king. Tianluan below the divine king realm could freely enter and exit the four realms. Once a divine king came here, the dark incantation would be awakened by the divine king's aura and automatically form a protective barrier. The Azura let out a bone-chilling laugh. In the past, he did not believe that the dark incantation was that powerful. After all, it was a spell that was hastily cast when the Underworld King and the Ancient Light King died together. Even if it was effective on the Divine King, its effect would not be too strong. At least, it would not be so strong that it could not be undefeatable. However, judging from the current situation, this dark incantation was not simple at all. It was even more terrifying than the strongest Tao will of Godfather, the Nether King, at his peak. Perhaps before the Underworld War broke out, Godfather had already predicted the outcome. That was why he had left the strongest backup plan for his four children. This heavenly edict came really quickly. Lord Yumo's voice seemed to be mocking. Not only did the heavenly edict Divine King come, but he also brought along an old enemy of the underworld, the light eldest son. Ever since Junemo was defeated and left, it had been a few decades of peace. Perhaps it was a long time for ordinary people, but in the eyes of the Divine King, it was no different from yesterday. The speed could not be said to be slow. Moreover, the heavenly edict deliberately brought light, which seemed premeditated. These two must have made preparations before they left. Otherwise, it would be impossible for them to come. With the heavenly edict's law attribute, it is extremely difficult to break Godfather's dark incantation unless they are willing to take the risk of falling from the dark incantation and attack with all their strength. Gue Di said. It was precisely because of this that the heavenly edict brought light. The law of light had an innate suppressive effect on the four god powers of the underworld. It was the sharpest ability to break the dark incantation. Next, Let's leave it to the heavens. Let's see if that fellow has truly inherited his father's primordial Tao will. Yumo's cold laugh contained helplessness. Even as strong as the four brothers were, they were powerless against the Divine King. If the dark incantation was broken, they would not be able to resist the heavenly edict and the current Divine King of Light. Resistance and escape would be wishful thinking. Sitting on the ground and waiting for death would be their only fate. If there was anyone among them who could escape from the hands of the heavenly edict and Divine King of Light, it could only be Azura. But that was Azura at his peak, not Evil Face with his incomplete soul. Therefore, they were powerless to come up with any countermeasures. Even clenching their fists was a waste of energy. Just as God, Lord Umo, said, it all depended on the Light Eldest Son's ability. If he reached the same level of combat power as the innate Ancient Light Emperor, they would be in danger. Hopefully, he had not reached the final step. As long as the dark incantation was not broken, Qin Hao and the others would not be in danger. The extreme light illuminated the endless universe. The star fields became even more dazzling under the law particles of the Divine King of Light. At this time, the Light Eldest Son stood outside of the heavenly Daos, looking at Azura foam across the vast wilderness. It was as if he was looking at Azura and the others. The old enemies met again, but neither side said a word. At this moment, Heavenly Edict Deity King looked at the current Divine King of Light, and his brows furrowed. Through the law attack just now, the Tao will of the Divine King of Light was dispersed before it could be infused with the world energy. It was as if the Tao will crashed into an invisible wall. Was this the current Divine King of Light's strength? If so, then this Divine King of Light was not someone Heavenly Edict Deity King dared to acknowledge. Even if the Divine King of Light had comprehended the power of primordial chaos, he was still not worthy of the title of Deity King. At the very least, he was not qualified to sit on the same level as the innate Deity Kings. As if noticing the disdain in Heavenly Edict Deity King's eyes, the figure inside the pure light slowly reached out his hand. His action was as if he was holding onto the heavens. At this moment, surging rays of light shot out from the endless primordial wilderness. They were like millions of surging rivers of light, all of which surged into the hands of the radiant Eldest Son. Gradually, the terrifying light condensed into a spear. Shwa! With a wave of his arm, the light divine spear flew through the air as if it had been thrown from the hands of an ancient god. It swept up a ray of light that stretched for tens of thousands of miles, illuminating the broken lands of the Massacre, Yellow Springs, Ghost Domain, and UMO Domain. Retreat. Azura looked at the light divine spear shooting from outside the heavenly Daos. Its power seemed to be able to pierce through the heavenly Daos, penetrate the entire Azura foam, and destroy the core of the Massacre Domain. In an instant, a thunderous roar came from his mouth. Including Qin Hao, the Yellow Springs sex experts all retreated. It was unknown if the spear could pierce through the heavenly Daos, but the shockwave could easily injure Tianlin, who was below the Divine King level, especially Qin Hao, who was the weakest among them. He only had 5 godly veins. He was even less than an ant. Chapter 22-26. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Light descended upon the world. The spear flew like a meteor, leaving a trail of light that stretched for tens of thousands of miles. It headed straight for Azura foam. The Azura ordered everyone to retreat. His long hair danced in the wind as he slowly raised his arms. Dark divine light flashed from his palms. Qin Hao's vision suddenly became somewhat blurry as the Azura moved. He felt an extremely powerful will of the way descend, imperceptibly protecting everyone in front of him. At that moment, Qin Hao looked through the blurry vision and felt the distance between him and the light spear widen. Even though he did not move, he was getting further and further away from the spear. Wong. At that moment, the way of the God realm seemed to feel a strong threat approaching. The power of the realm appeared and condensed into a vast half-moon-shaped layer of qi, encircling the broken continent. Then, Qin Hao saw the most terrifying scene in his life. Accompanied by a deafening roar, the spear thrown by the God King of Light collided with the layer of qi formed by the power of the slaughter world. Bang! A beam of light exploded in his eyes. Qin Hao's originally blurry vision became exceptionally clear under the illumination of this light. It was as if the light was right in front of him. It exploded in his eyes, almost blinding him. At that moment, the entire wilderness was lit up. The murky slaughter world was illuminated. The scorched earth under his feet was so clear. The broken mountain range, the dried riverbed, and the large and small pits all over the ground were like a person riddled with holes. All of its scars had been peeled off layer by the light that swept through the 9 heavens. Ah! Qin Hao covered his eyes with both hands as if he had gone mad. He let out an earth-shattering cry. Blood flowed through the gaps between his fingers as he fell down. He had suffered a shock that was so strong that he could not resist at all. The way of heaven was not penetrated. The protective layer formed by the power of the realm was covered with dense spider webs, like a piece of glass that would shatter with a touch. However, it was still there and successfully blocked the attack of the God King of Light. However, the light that swept through the way of heaven seemed to have penetrated the way of heaven and shone on this desolate land. The entire continent was rapidly covered by a layer of light. This layer of light was so strong that it seemed to surge into the soul. Qin Hao was affected by this, which was why he let out such an inhuman cry. He felt his body being melted by the light. His blood was being evaporated by the light. His godly bones were being crushed by the light. Even his godly soul was becoming transparent under the light. What kind of godly power was this? Qin Hao had never seen the God King of Light in his life. Even in his first life in the primeval world, he had never. Today he had witnessed it. Was the God King of Heaven. He was unable to describe the radiant God King's attack. It was just like how insignificant he was. He felt like all the laws and wills in the world had vanished. There was only light in the world. This was the God King God. Sky was translation of God, translation of his translation of translation of. Fortunately, the figure that was enveloped by the light did not step into the way of heaven in the end. Just a moment ago, the protective layer formed by the power of the realm had almost been covered by a terrifying crack. A gray netherworld aura quietly appeared and turned into a whirlpool that covered the sky. It sucked in all the light and swallowed it completely. Then, the word netherworld appeared above the whirlpool. The word suddenly collapsed and turned into countless gray dots that entered the way of heaven. At this moment, the massacre world regained its calm. The sky was still gloomy, and the vast continent was deathly silent. It was as if the light had never appeared. However, Qin Hao, who had been ruthlessly smashed into Azura Feng's dojo, raised his head and looked outside the way of heaven in horror. The heart of God's source in his chest thumped violently. He would never be able to forget the scene that had just happened. That brat was actually shaken down. What a good-for-nothing. Demon Master lowered his head and glanced at Qin Hao. However, his heart was also thumping violently. He stood on the spot as if he could not move. He had lost control of his legs. "Let's go back," said Azura. He silently turned around and ignored the 2 godly king radiances standing outside the way of heaven. Yellow Springs nodded. Gui Di moved his unconscious body, and only then did he regain his sense of control. He stretched out his hand and pulled Demon Master, who was still frozen on the spot. The 4 brothers floated down at the same time and stepped onto Azura Dojo. They passed by Qin Hao on the ground as if they did not see him. The netherworld incantation was stronger than expected. At this point, the light godly king was basically unable to break it. Azura and the others did not need to waste their time outside. Anyway, they felt uncomfortable just looking at them. Out of sight, out of mind. Why are they ignoring me? Qin Hao looked at the backs of the 4 godly masters. He slapped his legs and wanted to chase after them to ask what was going on. However, he realized that he still could not stand up. Outside the massacre world's way of heaven, in a vast void extremely far away, the light godly king, who was enveloped in light, slowly retracted his palm. A look of pity flashed past his eyes. "Why? Have you given up?" Tian Zhao looked at the figure in the light beside him. "I can't break it," said the light godly king. "This is just the beginning. Your father must have taught you a lot of primordial level light arts, right?" Tian Zhao did not think that the current light godly king had used his full strength. At least, Tian Zhao himself had seen a few powerful great light divine incantations. Those were the moves used by the previous light godly king to kill sword godly king. But now, the light eldest son who inherited his father's legacy did not use them on the massacre world. The figure in the light quietly turned around and left the ancient underworld in an instant. He turned into a light dot and disappeared in front of Tian Zhao without giving him any explanation. Although he knew a few powerful light divine incantations, including the primordial law, none of them could break the ancient underworld king's netherworld incantation. This netherworld incantation that protected the massacre world was very powerful. At least, the light godly king could not break it yet. He had to go back and think about it carefully to find a way to break it. "And here I thought you were very capable." Tian Zhao snorted in disdain at the direction where the figure left. Although the light eldest son inherited his father's legacy and became the deity king, his light Tao was still weaker than his father's innate deity king. This was understandable. However, this did not change Tian Zhao's disdain for the light eldest son. This was the superiority of an innate deity king. Sigh. Tian Zhao sighed at Azura phone. He clasped his hands behind his back, shook his head, and left. He had thought that the light eldest son would be able to help him break the curse. He did not need to break it completely. He only needed to shake it a little, even if it was just a tiny crack. But with just a tiny crack, Tian Zhao would be able to pierce through the heavenly Tao and find his son's murderer. Unfortunately, the current light godly king's cultivation was still not strong enough. However, Tian Zhao believed that the light godly king would give him an answer. Especially with the existence of this netherworld incantation, the current light godly king would recognize himself. As long as he could not break it, it would prove that he was not as good as the Ming king, and this would be a disgrace to the light domain. "I will be back." Slowly turning his head, Tian Zhao smiled coldly at the slaughter world, as if he was smiling at Qin Hao. Then, he disappeared into the vast, untainted land. The next time he came, he would get what he deserved. Chapter 22-27. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Qin Hao sat on the ground, paralyzed. He could not calm down from the shock brought by the light godly king's spear. Today, he finally understood what it meant to be invincible in this world. The godly king's spear lit up the entire world. The light even penetrated his soul through the way of the heavens. It was hard to imagine. Without the protection of the realm force and the dark incantation, even 100 Qin Hao would have been cleanly eliminated by the light. This was the power of a godly king. The Tao was so powerful that words could not describe it. It was impossible to stop it. Following the departure of the two godly kings, the deathly still Azura phone gradually began to move. Wisps of soul-like black smoke slowly rose from the ground as usual. Suddenly, Qin Hao's ankle was firmly grabbed by a deathly pale hand that stretched out from beneath the stone slab. However, he was not shocked at all. His expression was calm. The deathly pale hand on his leg even gave him a long-awaited sense of security, calming the shock in his heart. He forcefully squeezed out a bit of strength from his numb body. He patted the dead hand on his leg and said, "Is everyone all right?" "Xiao, Xiao, Xiao, Xiao." The wisps of black smoke that emerged from the ground condensed into black-robed Shuraguards. They appeared densely in the training hall. Gulp! An ugly human head appeared beside Qin Hao's ankle. As the ground trembled, a huge skeletal body crawled out. It stood 5 meters tall, its thick bones covered in sharp bone spikes. General Gu, who had the head of a human, the body of a beast, and 6 arms, fell on his butt just like Qin Hao. His fleshless sternum heaved violently as he began to pant heavily, as though he had just survived a calamity. Soul guards, bone guards, ghost guards, and Shura guards showed up frequently in the empty dojo of Shura Feng. Groups of deity generals also gathered together and made vague noises as if they were encouraging and comforting each other. At this moment, an extremely cold aura appeared behind Qin Hao. That aura contained an extremely powerful Tao of slaughter. He slowly turned his head and saw Mo2's face. "Brat, you actually dare to stand so close to the limitless radiance of 2 God Kings. Are you not afraid?" Mo2's expression was extremely unsettled. When the light and heavenly edict appeared, the divine guards and divine generals of the 4 god realms had all gone into hiding. In the entire world of slaughter, only the hothead Qin Hao dared to stand shoulder to shoulder with the 4 divine masters. 5 holy pulses and 50,000 years of cultivation. To put it bluntly, the Emperor of Heaven and Light could kill Qin Hao tens of thousands of times with just a fart. It didn't sound very elegant, but it was Mo2's real evaluation of Qin Hao. Scared, of course I'm scared. I'm scared to death. Qin Hao recalled the scene when the entire world was covered by light. His divine soul had become transparent under the light, and even his eyes of all spirits had been flashed with blood. "And you still dare to follow Lord Azura?" Mo2 glared. "How would I know how to get there? I just stood there in a daze." Qin Hao didn't think of anything at that time. After Mo2 heard this, he gave a thumbs up. "You've got guts. I hope that next time you won't die in a daze. Although we haven't known each other for long, our brothers in the Yellow Springs world admire you very much." The huge skeleton that looked like a human but not a beast stretched out a hand covered in dense thorns, wanted to pat him on the shoulder. Before the arm could land, Qin Hao's numb and limp body immediately dashed out like a lively rabbit. He would rather die under the purification of the Light God King than be stabbed by the Yellow Springs skeletal general's bone spikes that contained corpse poison. However, looking at the sea of figures on the mountain peak, Qin Hao finally smiled. The world of slaughter didn't follow in the footsteps of the world of sword. Everyone was safe and sound. Today, there was no danger. The arrival of the light and heavenly edict frightened the creatures of the 4 god realms. Not only these divine guards and divine generals, but even Lord Yu Mo and Gue, these expressions were very ugly. Their eyes were filled with fear. Even Azura, who had reached the level of quasi-divine king in his previous life, was under great pressure. If the dark incantation was broken, it was enough to imagine what would happen to the 4 god realms. Qin Hao, who had originally condensed 3 types of divine power and developed a divine vein, had just felt a sense of accomplishment when he received a heavy blow. It was the first time in his life that he saw the tyrannical power of a divine king. Compared to a divine king, his divine power and 50,000 years of cultivation were as insignificant as dust. After this day, Qin Hao entered the transmigration area again. He was even more hard-working than before and worked even harder to cultivate. The world of slaughter was temporarily safe because of the ancient underworld king's dark incantation. If the light and heavenly edict came again, the outcome would be uncertain. There was no way a divine king would return empty-handed twice. Qin Hao was very clear about the consequences if the light and heavenly edict came again, so he had to risk everything and use his life to cultivate. Even if he knew that he was no match for the light, at least next time, he hoped that he could stand firm and not scream like a pig being slaughtered the moment the light shone on him and roll on the ground. Cultivate, cultivate, cultivate crazily. The sword realm needed to be revitalized. Senior Sister had not revived yet, so he had to fulfill his promise and go to the recapture Glory Divine Realm to bring Shao Han back. He definitely could not be crushed by the Divine King's radiance. Imagine yourself as a tailor, going to sew a perfect piece of clothing. Qin Hao felt that Senior Yellow Spring's words were very reasonable. Wasn't the Edo reincarnation like sewing clothes? Sewing the soul into the body, using the needle and thread condensed from the Edo earth to create the brand of life, embroidering it into beautiful patterns on the clothes, making the clothes as lively as the owner. At that time, the clothes would become a brand new life. Time flew by. More than 10 years had passed since the light divine king's spear pierced the world of slaughter. At this time, Qin Hao was sitting cross-legged in the transmigration area, floating in the void. His body was emitting all kinds of divine splendor. Under the interweaving of divine power, the edges of his wheel flickered with gorgeous colors. Its shape was very similar to the image of the sixth divine vein. Beside him, a translucent hand bone floated. Pure sword will turn into gossamer and flowed into Qin Hao's heavenly wheel, making the image of his sixth divine vein clearer and more real. In addition, beside the Sword King's bone, there was a small cauldron full of holes. Only half of the cauldron was left. In the battle with Jun Mo, the blood spear was destroyed, and only the hilt of the great void sword was left. Its weapon spirit was almost dead. The damage that the great void cauldron suffered this time was 100 times, no, 1,000 times more serious than it was in the divine wilderness continent. If it was in the past, even Ten Qin Hao gods of Jin would not be able to repair it. However, he now had the mirror of samsara. Borrowing the primordial power of the transmigration area, although it was troublesome and tiring to repair, the speed was very impressive. As his cultivation and divine power continued to increase, Qin Hao only needed a few years to achieve results that might not be achieved in the outside world even after thousands of years. Unfortunately, as his divine way deepened, the great void cauldron gradually could not keep up with the strength of his divine power. Especially after witnessing the light divine king's attack, the great void cauldron could only be reduced to ashes. Probably only the Sword King's hand bone could withstand the divine king's attack. Chapter 22-28. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Because it was tainted by the power of the original realm, the Great Void Cauldron had unlimited possibilities for growth. However, growth required time, and the current situation did not give it sufficient conditions for growth. It was the same for Qin Hao. No matter how much he cultivated, he felt that his growth was too slow. The arrival of Tian Zhao and the light made him feel the difference between the clouds and the mud. This was not something that could be made up for in decades or centuries. Even the reincarnation mirror could not create a miracle. Defeating Jun Mo and removing the heavy haze that had accumulated on him for 4 lifetimes did not make Qin Hao relaxed. On the contrary, Jun Mo's defeat attracted an even more powerful divine king. Today, Tian Zhao brought the light to the massacre realm. There was no doubt that he was determined to destroy Qin Hao. Why did this happen? Even if he was extremely talented and had great abilities, what did he do to make the divine king personally attack him? The God King of Tian Zhao had not brought a single person with him, nor had he sent a single general. There was only one answer to this. Jun Mo was heavily injured and had died. No one understood evil power better than Qin Hao. The powerful bloodline of the divine king had been distorted by the heavenly wheel and the will of the way. It was impossible for it to recover. After all, Qin Hao had injected the divine king's sword will into Jun Mo's heavenly wheel. The heavenly wheel had been molded into a sword divine ring, and now he guessed that Jun Mo had already died, and Sword World had taken revenge. But Qin Hao didn't feel any joy in his heart, because the appearance of heaven's edict and light gave him an even heavier pressure, to the point that he felt suffocated. Buzz! His consciousness seemed to have sensed a call from the outside world. Qin Hao silently opened his eyes and looked at the broken great void cauldron lovingly. Then he held the divine king's bone and flew out of the reincarnation field. The great void cauldron was too badly damaged. It was better to leave it in the reincarnation mirror and let the weapon spirit repair it on its own. As he stepped out of the mirror, Qin Hao appeared in a training room. This was an excellent training ground that Azura and the other three had worked together to create for him. It had the effect of absorbing the great Tao of reincarnation. The Netherworld itself was proficient in the Tao of reincarnation. Although the Nether King's death had caused the ancient Netherworld's Tao of reincarnation to be reduced to almost nothing, it should still be used rationally to overlap the Netherworld's Tao of reincarnation with a mirror of reincarnation, thereby intensifying the speed of Qin Hao's cultivation. The four divine masters are waiting in the dungeon. Pushing open the heavy door of the practice room, Mo too was standing guard here, passing the message on behalf of Shura. Qin Hao nodded and walked along a tunnel that led deep into the ground. Today was the day to practice Edo Tensei. Shura had made a strict plan for Qin Hao's personal cultivation, practice, and battles with the four divine generals of the divine world. He had drawn up a growth chart for him over the past 1,000 years, showing in detail what Qin Hao needed to do every day. Qin Hao looked at the huge chart on the wall. It was densely packed with diagrams and words, which made Qin Hao feel a little scared. It showed that Shura had put in a lot of effort. However, if Qin Hao remembered correctly, after today, there would be a blank period at the end of the chart. Qin Hao did not know what that meant. Perhaps after the Edo Tensei, Shura would tell him the meaning behind the long blank period. Very soon, Qin Hao arrived at the most terrifying torture room in the depths of the dungeon. The blood qi in this torture room was denser than any other room in the dungeon. Moreover, it had gathered an extremely large amount of resentment. Ever since the failure of the first reincarnation, Qin Hao had dealt with no less than 50 Tian Luan divine souls in this terrifying torture room. Without a doubt, those divine souls had all perished because of the reincarnation. The strong resentment gathered more and more in this torture room, making it even more terrifying than a ghost cave. If not for the deterrence of Shura and Huang Quan, Qin Hao was worried that the resentment in this torture room would form something terrifying, like the evil soul. He stepped forward and his eyes fell on the stone platform. Today, lying on top of it was the corpse of a red-clothed elite. The corpse was wearing a blood-red robe, but its owner's face was deathly pale, without a trace of blood. In the battle with Jun Mo and Tamanaji, the four godly realms had suffered heavy casualties, especially with Shura Fang's original strength. Nearly 50% of the Shura guards had died in various ways. Some of them had their divine souls destroyed, but their corpses were intact. Therefore, Qin Hao did not lack tools for the Edo Tensei. Today, you will reincarnate 2 lines of divine runes. Shura pointed at a divine guard of the Yunzei godly realm kneeling on the ground in mourning clothes. Qin Hao looked at the divine guard in astonishment. This divine guard was not in the form of a divine soul, but a living person. Was he captured alive back then? Qin Hao's eyes flashed as he looked at the kneeling Yunzei divine guard. Like the red-clothed Shura guards on the stone platform, both of them had 2 lines of divine runes. Their paths were compatible, but this was not the main point. As Qin Hao continued to reincarnate, Shura had lowered the difficulty of the reincarnation. At the beginning, he was a Tianzhao divine general with 7 lines of divine runes, but now he was a divine guard with 2 lines of divine runes. The difference was not small. Shura did not want to be like this, because he had helplessly witnessed Qin Hao's failures over and over again. He had no choice but to lower the difficulty again and again. Until now, Qin Hao had failed a total of 50 times. Perhaps he was about to fail his 51st reincarnation. UMO Master stood up and pointed at Qin Hao's nose, spitting saliva as he lectured. "Kid, you look quite smart at first, and your talent and combat ability were not bad. Why are your reincarnation techniques so unsightly? Now I'm starting to suspect that the Tao in your evil power is the true Edo Tensei of the underworld." Qin Hao also shrunk his neck in response to the other's finger. He can summon the underworld gate and successfully push it open. There is no doubt that it is the Edo Tensei. "Third brother, you should be quiet," Shura said with a headache. Whether the Edo Tensei was real or not, it had to be real. But why did Qin Hao keep failing to reincarnate souls? Shura also did not understand. Could it be that the Edo Tensei required a set of steps, or the assistance of a dark art or dark incantation? The Nether King had never told them these things when he was alive, so Shura could only fumble forward. "Let's do it," Divine Lord Yellow Spring said. Time was extremely important to all of them. "Divine Lords, please show mercy, please show mercy. This lowly one is a direct descendant of the Yunzei Divine Realmsy clan. As long as you let me go, I am willing to pay any price. I believe that ancestral Uncle Tamanaji will also agree," the kneeling Yunzei Divine Guard sobbed. "Oh my, it's even the Divine Prince's nephew. Close relative." UMO Master's eyes emitted golden light as he spat out a voice that made one's scalp turn cold. "The direct descendant of the Yu clan will definitely die. Even if this reincarnation succeeds, I will still kill you with one slap." If it was any other soul, perhaps he would have spared his life and let him serve Shura Peak as an honest Shura guard. Who would have thought that he would be a direct descendant of Tamanaji's clan? This time, he would definitely die. The error-free chapters of Primordial Pill Venerate will continue to be updated in the new Book Ocean Pavilion. There will be no advertisements. Please bookmark and recommend the new Book Ocean Pavilion. If you like Primordial Pill Venerate, please bookmark. Primordial Pill Venerate's new Book Ocean Pavilion updates the fastest. Chapter 22-29. Crying and pleading did not receive any forgiveness. Tears could not wash away the crimes and blood on his hands. Lord Umo pressed his hand on the top of his head and forcefully extracted the soul of the Yunzei Divine Guard. As the fresh body fell to the ground like a withered flower, he tossed the soul that had been crumpled into a ball of light to Qin Hao. The moment Qin Hao caught the ball of light of the divine soul, evil intent spread out from his body. Streaks of gray light penetrated the ball of light continuously. As the Tianluan revolved, it began to remove the divine guard of the Yunluan Divine Guard's original Abijna, erasing all traces of his will of Tao, turning it into the cleanest and most empty state. Immediately after, dense rays of light scattered from Qin Hao's palm and landed on the corpse on the stone platform, completely covering the corpse of the red-clothed elite. Using evil energy as a thread, he guided the filth coagulation needles, stringing up the Yunzei Divine Guard's brand of life and piercing into the corpse. At this moment, Qin Hao's expression was very serious, as if he had transformed into the most meticulous tailor in the world. Using the needle and thread in his hand, he carefully mended the work in front of him. The rays of light flashed rapidly in his hand. Tens of thousands of needles and threads pierced into the flesh and godly bones at the same time, drawing the brand of life. Meticulous, meticulous, and meticulous, Qin Hao's proficiency and speed made him look like a machine without any loopholes. He completely sewed the soul into the corpse. Next, it was the last step, spirit-raising. Cries rang out in the torture room. The 5 divine veins that surrounded Tianluan, including the faintly discernible 6th vein, all exploded with a strong, ghostly curse power. At this moment, Qin Hao's palm seemed to have grasped the shackles of the 6 realms of reincarnation. Boundless, ghostly power poured into the corpse as he pressed his palm on the chest, opening up the 5 senses of the soul and dragging it from the realm of the dead to the realm of the living. Wong. The body on the stone platform trembled and flickered with chaotic light. An uncontrollable chaotic chi suddenly swept out. Qin Hao habitually squatted down and shrunk below the platform. Bang! A bloody mist erupted and covered the 4 walls. Pieces of broken organs flew everywhere and splattered all over Huang Quan's group. Qin Hao's bitter face appeared below the stone platform as he felt his soul being destroyed by the red-clothed elite's slaughtered Tao will. The 51st reincarnation failed. Moreover, the difficulty this time was practically at the lowest level of the divine path. Any lower, and it would be the mortal emperor level. You can't blame me. Qin Hao frowned as he looked at the 4 preachers in front of him. He was already very serious. Since the first failure, he would learn from the previous lessons and constantly improve his experience with each subsequent practice. However, this did not stop him from failing. The corpse explosion was like a curse that enveloped Qin Hao. He could not get rid of it no matter how hard he tried. Who? Shura exhaled a stuffy breath from his chest. He pointed at Qin Hao expressionlessly and said, "You are too cautious and serious. It is precisely because of your caution and seriousness that you restrained yourself." The 50th reincarnation turned into the same template as if you walked into a dead end. Because of this, the earth also lost its spirituality. When your Tao lost its spirituality, your soul had already died long ago. If a soul that had lost its spirituality fused with a corpse, what was the difference between it and a corpse? Until now, Shura could not find the reason for Qin Hao's first failure. However, he could accurately find the answer for every subsequent failure. Perhaps the engraved bones were incomplete, or there was a problem with the Tao that was removed from his soul, or there was a mistake with the spirituality. However, after the failure, he taught Qin Hao a lesson, which indeed attracted his attention. Moreover, he did not make the same mistake again. However, this kind of attention became a dead rule in Qin Hao's hands. No matter how careful he was or how familiar his technique was, when the body lost the spirituality of reincarnation, the work would be like his spiritless earth Tao will. How could not fail? It seems that he is indeed no longer suitable for the earth reincarnation, Yu Quan said solemnly. If Qin Hao revived Miori in such a state, the latter would disappear forever along with Ing Sha's corpse. Senior Yu Quan, Qin Hao was instantly extremely nervous. Was he going to be abandoned by the 4 divine masters? Don't be nervous. Shura waved his hand. Big Brother means that in the near future, he won't let you practice anymore. Perhaps we have forced you too much. You have also taken on too much pressure yourself, so you need to relax. Qin Hao silently lowered his head and quietly clenched his fists. Indeed, he had forced himself to be a little too impatient. He cultivated like a madman and lived in a state of mental tension every day. All he wanted was for his senior sister to come back to life as soon as possible. However, this was exactly the opposite of what he wanted to practice reincarnation. During this period of time, you should go somewhere far away and rest for a while, Shura said. Go somewhere far away. Qin Hao was stunned. Shura paced around the room with his hands behind his back and asked, "Raw, Chu, do you remember how long you have been in the massacre world?" It's been almost 300 years. Qin Hao roughly estimated. Yes, for almost 300 years, you have been enduring and hiding in the heavenly wheel. You have ruthlessly erased your original divine power and changed to the massacre path. Until now, you have already mastered the 4 great divine powers of the underworld. In these 300 years, you have improved so much that you could be called an eternal genius. Shura suddenly stopped and turned around to look at him. Do you still remember the sword world? The sword world. Qin Hao clenched his fists and unknowingly increased his strength. He naturally remembered and would never forget it. Originally, I left you here to cultivate because I wanted to speed up your growth under my supervision. Unfortunately, the harder you work, the further you realize that the things you want to obtain are often further away from you. Go back to the sword world and take a look. In these 300 years, many big things have happened in the sword world. Shura wanted Qin Hao to return to the sword world, not just to remove the knot and worry in his heart, but also to let Qin Hao find his original self. 51 reincarnations had failed. This was no longer a problem with the technique and Tao intent, but Qin Hao himself. Looking at the 50 reincarnations, Shura felt that Qin Hao's first attempt was the closest to success. Unfortunately, he failed and Shura still could not find a reason behind it. And for the subsequent reincarnations, Qin Hao's problem was very obvious. Even if he tried 50 more times, it would still be useless and he would still fail. Therefore, he wanted Qin Hao to leave the massacre world and return to the sword world to take a look. At the same time, he wanted to resolve his worries and find a trace of his former self. Shura felt that perhaps only the most primitive Qin Hao could truly display the Tao intent of the filthy earth. This was originally Mayan fourth brother's determination. We can't keep you trapped in the massacre world forever. It's good for you to go out and relax. Huang Quan did not want Qin Hao to have any other thoughts. The four god masters had not given up on him and wanted him to leave. I understand. Teacher Shura, can you tell me about the current situation of the sword world? Qin Hao raised his head, and his eyes were red. After the battle in the infinite god domain, when you drifted away from the massacre world, the fate of the sword world was reversed. Shura said slowly. This was not a secret, and many people in the god realm knew about it. Because Qin had always been sealed in Shura Peak and cut off from the outside world, he did not know about it. However, Shura had been paying attention to him since the beginning. Before the fusion of wisdom, he had already ordered the Shura guards to investigate the situation of the sword world. Tian Yong set up a boundary stone and created a shelter for the sword world. Your friends from afar also arrived on the same day. I have to say that they have great potential. I hope you can bring them all back this time. The friends that Shura mentioned were Zhan Wu. He did not know which corner of the Chaos Land he had appeared from, but Zhan Wu and Qin Hao had completely different personalities. The moment they made a move, they turned the weak sword world into a strong force. They sent out a sword cultivator army and destroyed 3 god realms in succession. 2 god masters died in his hands. Donghuang's realm is backed by the empty god realm, the son of the empty god. The empty god belongs to the light domain. Although he is not the strongest god master under the light domain, his strength is not to be underestimated. Every sentence that Shura said moved Qin Hao's heart and made his blood boil. He felt that his body was suddenly filled with power. Compared to the superiors, Tian Du and Bai Shun, the light domain's empty god was much weaker. However, he was definitely stronger than Xian Qi and Tianyin. He was definitely not someone that the newly ascended god master could compare to. Moreover, the empty god was loyal to the light domain. Due to this relationship, Zhan Wu stopped in time and did not cause a huge disaster. Otherwise, even if he had the war god clan behind him, once the light domain became angry, it would be an incomparably heavy blow to the sword world. After all, the war god clan was a god king force outside the sword world. They might be able to protect Zhan Wu from death, but if the light domain started a realm war, the sword world would definitely be finished. Zhan Wu saw this point clearly, so he did not push his luck. That guy is still as arrogant as ever. Qin Hao was so excited that his body trembled slightly. Everyone had come. Wei Wei Lu, the 4 god generals of Wave Slayer, and that extremely arrogant guy, Tian Do. Including Zhan Wu, 8 gods walked out of the divine wilderness. Tian Luan was perfect, and this was a very strong lineup. Just as Shura had said, these 8 people had great hidden potential. Even the dignified god Shura, who was at the level of a god king, was impressed. Chapter 2230. There is no lack of perfect life forms in the Divine King faction. Looking at all the great gods with great cultivation, there wasn't a single one who wasn't a well-known figure among perfect life forms. For example, Supreme Extreme, Sky Supervisor, and White God. Perfect life forms were even rarer in God King factions. After so many years, Qin Hao had appeared in the world of slaughter in the ancient underworld and stirred up great waves. Now that the sword world had 8 heavenly wheels, a fresh force on par with Qin Hao, Azura couldn't help but want to nurture them. The underworld needed perfect life forms too much, not just now, but even more in the future. If the underworld king was fortunate enough to descend, it would be tragic if he didn't have any perfect gods to serve him. Azura's intuition told him that the 8 potential in the sword world would become indispensable helpers for Qin Hao in his attempt to break through to the God King Dao. Currently, the ancient underworld was protected by the Dark Curse and could maintain a period of peace. Thanks to Tian Yong God's intervention, the sword world had temporarily put an end to external threats. Both worlds were relatively safe. Therefore, Qin Hao's return to the sword world was basically safe. Azura knew that there was a God King army stationed in the sword world. It was because of this that he dared to let Qin Hao go back with peace of mind. A beam of black light of slaughter melted into the night like a shooting star and silently escaped from the ancient underworld. It flew into the vast universe and headed for the extremely distant Great Tao Sword World. Qin Hao was on his way back to the seamless divine realm. Azura was the only one accompanying him on this trip. Too many people would attract too much attention and expose themselves too easily. For safety's sake, everything was kept simple. At this moment, Qin Hao followed beside Azura and was enveloped in his divine power. He could feel the strong malice inherent in the evil face. Compared to when they first met, the feeling was completely different. When Qin Hao first met Azura's evil face, he only felt fear and panic. But now, the cold malice of the other party only made him feel warmth. Qin Hao was grateful to Azura. Because of various reasons, fate had allowed two people who had never interacted with each other and even wanted to kill each other to finally rely on each other and keep each other warm. Qin Hao had cultivated the divine way for nearly 60,000 years in the slaughter world and had condensed 4 strands of divine power. Moreover, he had lived until now. He was inseparable from Shura's life and death struggle. It was Shura who had used his merciless Tao of slaughter to open a path for Qin Hao to survive, protecting him from the tyrannical Heavenly Edict divine army. Perhaps Azura hadn't thought like this since the beginning. Even to the extent that he'd nurtured and taught Qin Hao with all his might now, it was only because of Miaoli. He wanted to make up for the regret he'd had for his younger sister all those years ago from Miaoli, so he'd benefited Qin Hao instead. But no matter what, Qin Hao was indebted to Azura. This was a fact. Moreover, he had come alone this time, personally protecting Qin Hao. He was a divine master of a world, the divine prince of the underworld in the past. At his peak, he had reached the half-divine king realm, and had once fought a decisive battle with the radiant divine king. Qin Hao really admired such a person for being able to put down his status. "Why are you looking at me with such a strange gaze?" Shura stood with his hands behind his back. Dense Tao of slaughter wrapped around the two of them as they shuttled through the universe at an unbelievable speed. "No, nothing." Qin Hao smiled and was too shy to speak. While he was thinking about the sword world, he suddenly thought of something. He wanted to ask Shura, but in the end, he didn't speak. At this time, Qin Hao thought of a person, Mujan. Mujan was a subordinate of God Lu. He was the sword-bearing attendant of the Mu clan's young master Mubai. He came from the slaughter divine realm and was covered in pure Tao of slaughter. In the past, Qin Hao didn't understand the Tao of slaughter. He only felt that Mujan's Tao of slaughter was very cold and destructive. The first time they met, he was able to fight evenly with Wuk. Although in the end, he was slightly weaker in the Sword Emperor's 7 murderous moves and lost to Wuk. Qin Hao had always wanted to win Mujan over to his side. In the past, he only thought about it. Now that he cultivated the Tao of slaughter, his desire to win Mujan over became even stronger. Qin Hao was familiar with the Tao of slaughter. Because of this, when he looked back at Mujan, he suddenly found that the latter's Tao of slaughter was very pure. It was much purer than he had imagined. The feeling that Mujan gave him was that the purity of his Tao was very close to Azura's. He did not understand the reason. Logically speaking, with Mujan's immortal grade heavenly wheel, no matter how strong his bloodline was, he should at most be a direct descendant of a big family in the slaughter world. Someone like Jia Kong. In order to escape the 500-year fire beacon tribulation, the elders of the family secretly sent him out. With Mujan's bloodline and heavenly wheels, he definitely wasn't qualified to be compared to Azura. However, Qin Hao had a strange feeling that the two of them were very similar in some aspects. As for what exactly was similar, he couldn't tell. In fact, Qin Hao really wanted to ask Azura if he knew Mujan. However, Mujan was a godmaster. Ever since the Underworld War, he had been living in Azura Peak. No matter what, he left everything to the Slayer to do. It was impossible for Azura to know about the existence of Mujan, a creature from the slaughter divine realm. Azura's status was too high. Therefore, Qin Hao swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. It was probably a waste of time to ask. Along the way, Azura's divine shield technique was very fast. The world of the universe retreated from Qin Hao's perception with an extremely terrifying influence. That kind of speed was beyond his understanding of the divine path. Even the Alchemy Master Clan, who was good at the path of evasion, with their sky-stomping technique, which they were proud of, seemed insignificant in front of Azura's tyrannical strength. Qin Hao knew that it wasn't that the divine sky-stomping technique was weak, but that there was a gap in their cultivation. At this moment, wrapped in Azura's divine power, Qin Hao's divine consciousness radiated outwards, sensing the great path universe. When he was escaping from the Sword Divine Realm and drifting to the Slaughter Divine Realm, he was in a coma. He had been passively carried by the reincarnation mirror, so he didn't know the route of the Chaos Land at all. But now, Qin Hao was awake and saw everything with his own eyes. Only then did he see how far he had drifted when he was unconscious. In just a few short hours, Azura had already brought him through the 100 Directions divine realms. There were no less than tens of thousands of heavenly Daos. The river of stars in front of them was like a space-time passageway that shone with resplendent starlight. It was as if there was no end to it, and the sword realm was infinitely vast. It was simply too shocking. If it was me returning to the sword divine realm by myself, I might not be able to return even after tens of thousands of years, said Qin Hao resentfully. Only now did he understand the original intention of Azura personally sending him. Firstly, it was to protect his safety. Secondly, with Qin Hao's cultivation level, it would be impossible for him to return to the Sword Divine Realm. He didn't even know the way back and would be lost in the Chaos Land. Tian Zhao is an innate deity king who looks down on all worlds. He doesn't care about any Tianlin, including the innate deity kings who are as strong as him. Azura glanced at Qin Hao. With Tian Zhao's identity, it was impossible for him to hide outside of the slaughter world and keep an eye on Qin Hao to prevent him from escaping. In the eyes of a deity king, no matter where in the Chaos Land, it was all the same. I understand. Qin Hao nodded. He understood Azura's intention. Not only would Tian Zhao not wait for him, but he also wouldn't send his subordinates to do so. From the moment the light deity king couldn't break the dark incantation, it was meaningless to wait for him. However, you still need to be careful. I don't trust anyone around you, unless it's me. Azura said. The reincarnation mirror was much stronger in his hands than the hands of Qin Hao and the other generals, including Huang Quan. Azura was confident that with the power of Tao created by the reincarnation mirror, even a deity king would have a 70% chance of escaping. Of course, he might have to pay a price. However, as long as he followed, Qin Hao could guarantee his personal safety. Miao Li, who was cultivating her soul inside the heavenly wheel, would also be safe. Chapter 2231. 114 Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation encountering a swordsman. The evil image was only a secondary image. Without a divine source, it could not sustain the divine escape technique for long periods of time, especially when it had to sustain the Great Path divine escape technique continuously. They set off from the massacre world and traveled through the vast universe. Qin Hao did not know how long they had been traveling. He could feel the Shura's divine will gradually weakening. Although it was not as severe as when he fought with the upper extremity, it was still somewhat weak. Master Shura, let's find a place to rest for a while. Qin Hao's speed gradually slowed down. In his spiritual awareness, the starry sky in front of him suddenly changed, as if he had entered a brand new universe. The spiritual light emitted from the realms in the untainted land seemed to be much more gorgeous, full of vigorous vitality. Qin Hao's spiritual energy was not only limited to the untainted land, but also the untainted land. Qin Hao understood that they had completely left the ancient underworld that was shrouded in silence. The eldritch universe in front of him was the eldritch universe that he was familiar with. The Shura ignored Qin Hao and wanted to rest after traveling for a while. Perhaps it was an insult to him, but he took the initiative to disperse his divine power and let Qin Hao ride the light. The two of them seemed to be on a small boat as they slowly moved forward. As Qin Hao gazed at the resplendent and colorful starry sky, he could even vaguely make out a tiny sword-shaped image in the depths of the radiance, at a location extremely far away. Suddenly, he could not help but clench his fist excitedly. He knew that was the location of the Great Path Sword World. However, he was still very far away from it. He was back. In his memory, there were 3 intersecting sword lights. Now, there were only 2 left. One of the sword lights had disappeared forever. That was the former seamless sword world. He did not know if it was an illusion, but when he looked ahead, Qin Hao vaguely felt that the remaining 2 sword lights were faintly overlapping and showing signs emerging. Seeing this, Qin Hao understood that the departure of the seamless sword world had completely changed the future of the sword world. God Lu and Dragon Master had kept their promise and inherited the will of the seamless sword god. Now, they were beginning the merging of the 2 realms. The fusion of the divine realm and the innumerable heavenly Daos were irrigated by the brand new realm force. This was not something that could be completed in a short period of time. This was an extremely huge task. Qin Hao's heart stirred, and a sparkling and translucent hand bone appeared in his palm. Then, the hand bone disappeared back into his palm. Jun Mo had killed Wu Ji and snatched the God King bone of the Sword God King. Today, he brought the God King bone back and snatched it back from Jun Mo. It was time for this hand bone to return to its true Dao source. Qin Hao shifted his direction slightly, and his divine power enveloped the 2 of them. It was as if they were stepping on a small boat as they headed toward the nearby heavenly Dao. He had brought back the God King's bone from the Sword Realm, but without Senior Azura's help, this God King's bone would not have been able to return. At present, Azura's condition was not too good, and his face was slightly tired. Qin Hao did not want everyone to see the illustrious god Azura covered in dust when he returned to the Sword Realm. That would cause his teacher to lose his original divine might. At this moment, the divine radiance entered the small heavenly Dao. This heavenly Dao was very weak. Qin Hao and Azura both had perfect heaven wheels, and their cultivation was extremely strong. They quickly resonated with the Dao of the heavenly Dao and were not suppressed by the heavenly Dao's might. Dispersing the divine power in his body, he broke through the clouds and descended. What entered his eyes was an azure sea, and countless continents of different sizes floated on the sea surface. From the imprint of the heavenly Dao, he understood that this was an incomplete heavenly Dao. It had once lost the core of the divine realm due to the realm war. Just like the central continent city that Qin Hao had once been to, it was a land without a master, and there was no heavenly Dao controller. However, the area of this incomplete sea and continent was much larger than the central continent. Although there was no heavenly Dao controller operating it, there were many forces of heaven wheels. Qin Hao sensed a huge island where the aura of heaven wheels was the densest and directly descended with Azura. This island was called the Atoll, and it was the core island of the incomplete heavenly Dao. It could not be compared to any of the divine realms that Qin Hao remembered, but it could provide a place to rest and wash away the dust of the journey. On this atoll, the most eye-catching building was an incomparably huge restaurant. It was dazzling with gold and jade. An auspicious chi soared into the sky. All of the heaven wheels of the sea and continent were gathered in this restaurant. When Qin Hao and Azura stood here, they saw the two large words Mirage written on the plaque hanging high above. The strokes were powerful and contained divine power, which showed that the owner of the restaurant was extraordinary. Although this place is small, the scenery of the heavenly Dao is also elegant. Teacher, I'm sorry to have to trouble you. Qin Hao led the way and let Azura go first. Shura placed his hands behind his back and stepped into the elusive Mirage expressionlessly. Although he had dispersed the strong, murderous aura and concealed his murderous nature, the Shura evil form had a vicious aura that made people want to retreat immediately after seeing it. After all, The god of Azura was the god of Azura. Waiter, give me a room of the highest quality. Qin Hao walked over to the counter. This heavenly Tao was a little small and simple, but with Azura by his side, no matter how bad this place was, he had to use the best and enjoy the treatment of a god above gods. Perhaps Azura himself didn't care, but Qin Hao had to do this. Whether it was because of Azura's status or because of his duties as a disciple, he had to properly arrange everything. Behind the counter, the clerk casually glanced at Qin Hao and then immediately buried his head in the accounts. At this time, a waiter dressed as a wine servant came out of the kitchen with a tray under his arm. He wanted to warmly entertain Qin Hao, but when he heard Qin Hao ask for a room of the highest quality, his enthusiasm was instantly extinguished. What kind of place was this Mirage? Who did he think he was? Could anyone sit in a room of the highest quality? It's full. Dear customer, just make do with it there. The waiter pointed toward the corner. In this hall that was packed with people, every single table filled, there was only a single table left in an inconspicuous corner. Moreover, there were already 2 cultivators seated there, but there was still an empty seat. Qin Hao looked over and frowned slightly. Then, he took out a divine artifact and placed it on the counter, saying, "Please give me an elegant room of the highest quality." The Azura god, the lord of a realm, the divine prince of the ancient nether realm, who was at the peak of the divine path and a quasi-divine king, was placed in a small corner like this. Moreover, he had to put together a table with others. Qin Hao didn't know what the waiter was thinking. He must be tired of living. Azura stomped his feet, and all the living beings under the heavenly Tao instantly turned into ashes. Forget it. Those who don't know fear nothing. Behind the counter, the waiter sensed the aura of the divine artifact. He stopped recording and immediately looked up. His eyes flashed. This time, he looked at Qin Hao seriously and then buried his head to continue recording. The divine artifact was real. Unfortunately, it was still not enough to enter a room of the Mirage. Please give me a room of the highest quality. Qin Hao took a deep breath and felt a little depressed. Azura had been standing behind him for a long time. Didn't you hear clearly? There's no room of the highest quality. There's only that table. Just make up your mind. The waiter was a little impatient, especially when he saw that the waiter had no intention of receiving Qin Hao. He became bolder and seemed to whisper, "Who do you think you are?" Of course, this was for Qin Hao to hear. Qin Hao's eyes darkened. He sensed the aura of the waiter and the waiter. One was an Emperor's Nirvana realm cultivator, and the other was a divine cultivator. Their cultivation was not very high, but they dared to be so arrogant, sensing that Azura, who was standing behind him, seemed to be moving. The temperature of the entire first floor of the Mirage dropped slightly, and the will of death that belonged to the underworld quietly filled the air. Qin Hao couldn't help but break out in cold sweat for the waiter and the waiter. He felt sad for the owner of the Mirage. Just as Qin Hao was about to take another divine artifact and strive to get a room of the highest quality, a group of figures appeared in front of the door. They were all dressed in white and carried swords. They gave off a valiant and upright feeling. "Waiter, give us a room of the highest quality." The leader was a middle-aged man with thick black eyebrows. His casual words and actions exuded the sharp aura of the heavenly wheel sword way. Then, he casually threw a divine artifact toward the counter. Okay. The waiter quickly threw down the ledger and pointed at the waiter. "Hurry up and arrange it. Lead the way for our distinguished guests." Yes. The waiter bowed and nodded repeatedly. He was very humble in front of this group of white-robed cultivators. "Everyone, please follow me." Watching the group of cultivators follow the waiter and disappear up the stairs, Qin Hao's face completely darkened. He turned his gaze to the waiter, who continued to record the accounts. However, the waiter didn't seem to notice at all. He treated Qin Hao as heir. Chapter 2232. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation, haha. The first floor of Mirage was filled with laughter. After paying the same price, Qin Hao asked 3 times in a row. Others entered and asked some simple questions before being respectfully invited to a private room upstairs. This scene would make anyone a laughingstock in any realm. At this moment, the cultivators on the first floor of Mirage did not mean to mock Qin Hao. Their laughter was very natural. One of them was overjoyed as he said, "Fellow Taoists, you must have come from the distant god realm. Please don't be angry, and don't take your anger out on Mirage, because you are different from those people. They are sword cultivators from the sword realm." Sword cultivators? Qin Hao looked at the person who spoke and asked curiously, "What's the difference?" In the past, Great Tao Sword World was not weak. When the 3 deity worlds were combined, it was natural for them to be stronger than ordinary deity worlds. However, that was in the past. With the destruction of Infinite Divine Realm, Sword World suffered a great loss. Why did it feel like Sword World had become stronger after its foundation was damaged? You may not know this, but Sword World is now under the protection of Tianyong God. God of War has stationed a strong army there, and the sword cultivators of Sword World are all sword princes. The 8 perfect heaven wheels under him look down on the other worlds. "This is a scene that cannot be provoked or compared to," said the person. This person said, "The heavens brought disaster to Sword World, destroying one of their divine regions. However, Sword World didn't fall because of hatred. Instead, they continuously wiped out the Eastern Imperial Realm and the other 2 realms. Now that Sword World was unified and with the help of a descendant of the God of War race, the sword cultivators were very strong. Anyone in the surrounding deity worlds would give them some face. Even though Sword World was very far away, they were still afraid of their reputation. Hence, Mirage could not be blamed. The Mirage Pavilion had its own rules. Regular customers and strong customers were treated differently from strangers. "I see." Qin Hao nodded silently. He was pleased and surprised. God Lord Tianyong and God of War race were strong enough to make people pale. One was about to become a deity king at the peak of primordial world, while the other was an innate true deity king. The Sword Realm had a relationship with the 2 divine kings. Furthermore, after the unification of the realm, Zhan Wu's arrival had completely intensified the sharpness of the sword cultivators. Therefore, the other god realms would give face to sword cultivators when they encountered them and provide them with some convenience. There is nothing wrong with Mirage's method. Qin Hao could understand and was happy because the sword world was slowly awakening. But the existence behind Qin Hao probably couldn't understand. On the contrary, Azura felt that this land of ants had violated his dignity. His pitch-black hair was like an icy, cold pool that rippled, and strands of terrifying black-colored threads that were visible to the naked eye floated up into the air in the hall on the first floor. Instantly, the slaughter Tao insight that carried along a dense aura of death silently descended, and it was like the god of death was approaching. Perhaps with just a thought, the vigorous Mirage would instantly decay along with its people and items. But just as Azura was about to erupt with power, one person erupted before him. Qin Hao's robes fluttered in the wind as his sword intent condensed into a whirlwind of sword Tao. This vigorous sword intent seemed to transform into an invisible sword that soared into the sky and pierced through the roof. At this moment, the massive Mirage shuddered in the midst of this destructive sword intent, and the blue sea began to churn, causing countless islands to rise and fall. One could even faintly hear the heavenly Tao cry out in pain. This, as Zhang Bo gazed at Qin Hao, who was covered in flowing sword radiance, he no longer dared to be careless. His eyes were filled with fear, and the laughter on the first floor fell silent. The waiter who had just escorted the sword cultivator up the stairs was so frightened that he slipped and fell on the stairs, his face pale. A sword cultivator. Qin Hao is also a sword cultivator of the sword world. This sword intent was vigorous and difficult to resist. Although it was very complicated and seemed to contain many Tao insights, it was too majestic. It was so vast that all the cultivators here had never seen such unfathomable power of the sword Tao. At this moment, including the sword cultivators who had just arrived and had yet to sit down, The middle-aged leader raised his thick eyebrows. He sensed the surging sword intent coming from below, and his heartbeat sped up. He said, "Which heavenly Tao wielder has arrived in Sword World? Men, quickly go and welcome this senior." No, we'll all go down." This sword Tao was too strong. Even this middle-aged man, with 4 meridians of the great heavenly chakra realm, trembled in the face of the sword intent that erupted from downstairs. Such a terrifying sword Tao strength was definitely not an ordinary heavenly Tao elder of the sword world. It could be an elder of the Sword King Hall, or even a divine general beside God Lu and Dragon Master. They had to go down together to welcome him. Just as this group of people from the sword world lifted their robes and almost rolled down the stairs at this moment, in the lobby of the first floor, the auctioneer respectfully returned the divine artifact to Qin Hao. He then deeply bent his waist and pushed open the guardrail of the counter with incomparable politeness. Chapter 22:33. The reason why the strong became the strong was because the weak served as a foil. Otherwise, no matter how strong a person was, they would not be able to stand out in this lonely world. The cultivators in the mirage were still alive. Listening to their clamor, this was the normal world. At this moment, the Azura's eyes were slightly dazed. A scene from a long time ago appeared in his mind. A young man was holding his father's broad hand. They were standing on the peak of a palace full of flowers. They looked down at the Azura peak that was full of life and beautiful like a paradise. Countless living beings of the slaughter world were working in the fields filled with the fragrance of flowers. However, the young man's father seemed to be very happy. His imposing body was emitting dense nether chi. When he raised his arm, a terrifying aura of death had already covered the entire slaughter world. "You are the Azura god. Your territory should be filled with blood and slaughter. Peace and flowers are not compatible with you." The young man raised his head slightly and hurriedly reached out to grab the Nether King's sleeve, stopping him. His clear eyes curved into crescents, and a pure smile appeared on his face. He said, "I like it this way, because this kind of slaughtering world is more lively." The young and kind Azura prince stopped the Nether King. It was just like how Qin Hao had stopped the Azura with his sword intent. Qin Hao's Edo Tensei kept failing. Perhaps it was because he had lost something. How could Azura not be the same? He had also lost some very precious things. Perhaps I should abolish the fire beacon calamity of 500 years of reincarnation. The Azura thought. He was probably moved by Qin Hao's words, or perhaps the beautiful past made him change his mind. "Teacher, what's wrong?" Qin Hao felt that the Azura's eyes were a little dazed. "Nothing." The Azura's dazed eyes became cold again. Creak. The door opened slowly. The owner of the Mirage walked in with small steps. He was holding a pile of dishes in his hands. Behind him, Thin Palm was holding 2 bottles of immortal wine. "Hi gods, please enjoy." The fatty respectfully placed the dishes on the table. He carefully stood at the side, waiting for orders. "You two leave," the Azura said. His calm voice was like the cold winter wind piercing into the bones. The fatty and Thin Palm both shivered. They quickly turned around and left, closing the door behind them. "Teacher, please." Qin Hao lifted the jade pot and poured a cup for Azura. The room was filled with the aroma of wine. There was meat and vegetables in front of him, and there was even a Dao fruit to moisten his throat. Their knife skills, color, and taste were all impeccable. Mirage was like a courier station in the Great Desolate Era. They bought and sold top-grade ingredients from the nearby God realms. These ingredients themselves were extremely valuable and could help one improve their divine Tao. However, to Qin Hao, who was about to perfect 6 meridians, the effect was negligible. It was even less effective against the Azura. However, it was still possible to relieve tiredness. Azura coldly glanced at the wine cup in front of him. The disdain in his eyes was undisguised. Just by smelling the wine, he could tell that the quality was not very good. It was just a dregs. He was the Azura god, the former Azura prince of the Nether realm. He used to drink nectar made from nether liquid and the nectar of the red spider lily. However, this small way of heaven was naturally incomparable to the ancient nether realm. Azura was indeed a little tired. He reluctantly picked up the wine cup and took a sip. His cold eyes, which were like a dead cold pool, suddenly rippled. He looked faintly intoxicated and said in surprise, "This taste is delicious." Splash. Chinhao almost spilled the wine in the jade pot. Was the person in front of him really the Azura god? "Hey, fatty who is eavesdropping outside the door. Immediately bring all your wine here. All of it." Azura raised his head and drank it in one gulp. He had never drunk water outside the Nether River, nor had he tasted wine outside the Nether Realm. This small way of heaven's wine was very special and very fresh. Just as Chinhao said, it was a little smoky. Plop! Outside the door, the owner of the Mirage was so scared that he almost knelt on the ground. He held onto the door frame and barely steadied himself. His head was covered in cold sweat. He did not eavesdrop. He swore that he was only waiting outside for the two exalted gods to order him around. Knock, knock, knock. There was a soft knock on the door. "What is it now?" Azura stopped drinking. He had just gotten a little excited, but he was constantly disturbed. I am the sect master of Xiao, Song Heaven Path's pure sword sect under God Lu. I am a reserved divine guard of the Sword King Palace. I wonder which senior from my realm is here. Is there anything I can do for you? The voice outside the door was extremely respectful. The more Azura listened, the more his eyes darkened. "Oh, my master and I are going to the Mirage to do some mysterious missions. You could do your own things. There is no need to delay here." Chinhao secretly glanced at Azura. It was not that he did not want to open the door and let the people from the Sword Realm in. It was just that there was a killing god sitting inside. "I understand. I hope the two seniors have a safe journey," the voice outside the door said. After that, he disappeared. "Master, the seniors inside are too arrogant," a young disciple said. "Shut up." The middle-aged man lowered his voice and scolded sternly. Then, he brought the group of disciples back to their rooms. Chapter 2235. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Zhan Meng was not as strong as his brother, Zhan Jiutian. He was in front of the throne of the god of War World and was above everyone else. However, Zhan Meng was the spirit of the heavenly Tao and was formed by the will of the god of war. When his consciousness was formed, he only saw the shadows of the god of war and his brother. It was the same for Shiji now. He would not look at anyone directly, including Shangji, who was known as the #1 god in the Archean world. Reverence and fear did not exist in Zhan Meng's mind. Therefore, he would do what he said. How could he allow Shura to enter the sword world? Moreover, Shura was looking down on him. Unfortunately, Zhan Meng did not understand what kind of existence his opponent was. Shura was not arrogant when he called him a little god. Shura had strong capital because even Shangji was defeated by Shura. The bright light of the god of war illuminated the vast galaxy. The fighting spirit particles in Zhan Meng's body were like small and impulsive warriors waiting for the war drums to sound to tear the enemy apart. The Azura's icy cold killing intent dyed the entire world behind him in darkness. Amidst the terrifying screams, the darkness seemed to be filled with ghosts that had been summoned by the death god to claim their lives. The crazy slaughtered Tao insight could destroy any peace and beauty in the world and spread disaster and death throughout the world. Chinhao looked at the two transcendent giants. One of them was a great god under the war god king, while the other was a massacre world god master who had entered the quasi-god king realm at his peak. If they were to clash, none of the divine worlds would be able to withstand the shockwaves from their divine power. Sword World, which had just recovered, would probably suffer a second calamity. At this moment, Qin Hao was so anxious that he felt like his heart was being eaten by thousands of ants. He did not even have time to explain. Even Shura would not give him a chance. Little god, with one move, I can let you see the yellow spring road to the underworld. At the end of the road, I will wait for your soul to kneel and beg for mercy. Azura formed an ancient nether seal with one hand. The dark world behind him exploded with numerous space cracks. It was a terrifying scene. In an instant, a vigorous grand mist gathered and took shape. The extreme darkness was like a primordial beast opening its mouth. It rolled up the light of death and swallowed the towering war god phantom. When Azura attacked, Zhang Ming's expression couldn't help but change. Only now did he finally realize how powerful his opponent was. This divine power was even stronger than that of his brother Zhang Jiutian and the first divine lord of the Archean realm, Shangji. Zhang Ming let out a roar and stepped into the void. The untainted land shook violently. When he was with Vivian, Qin Hao could always find peace. No matter how agitated he could always calm down. It was just like when they were silently accompanying each other at the setting sun peak. However, he caused Vivian to be constantly on tenterhooks. This was especially so when the Sword World encountered a calamity this time. Qin Hao was facing the greatest calamity of his life, and Vivian wasn't by his side. One could imagine how she felt when she rushed to the Sword World. Letting go of Vivian, Qin Hao's gaze fell behind the crowd. There stood a muscular figure. He was wearing a shiny God King armor. He didn't wear a divine helmet, and his face was the color of wheat. Qin Hao walked over through the crowd and smiled at Zhang Wu. Then, the two of them reached out a fist at the same time and bumped each other. Good brother. Qin Hao opened his arms and gave Zhang Wu a bear hug. I thought you were done for this time. I was even prepared to set up a tombstone for you. Zhang Wu also gave Qin Hao a bear hug and squeezed out a strange and twisted smile. Although it was very unnatural, it was the best he could do. Then, do you have to build a thatched cottage next to my tombstone to keep watch for me for 10,000 years? Qin Hao said as he let go of Zhang Wu. The two of them raised their heads and laughed wildly. Their laughter was earth-shattering. It's good that you came back safely. At this time, Dragon Master noticed Shura standing in the distance. He could feel the dense slaughter will. This was a divine power that belonged to the ancient underworld. Could this be? Long Ao's huge dragon eyes suddenly widened as shock flashed through them. When Jun Mo led the 8 divine masters to destroy the Avicii divine domain, he didn't even frown when so many sword cultivators died. He only felt anger in his heart. He wanted nothing more than to twist the divine Prince Jun Mo's head off. At this moment, Long Ao looked at Shura and subconsciously stepped back. His expression was getting worse and worse. He is my teacher. Qin Hao turned around and looked at Shura. The cold Shura god seemed out of place with the other sword gods. Ahem. God Lu glanced around and said, "Let's go back to the sword realm first." This was not the place to catch up. Although the Tianzhao army had retreated, there were still Tianzhao divine realms, heavenly wheels walking around the sword realm. Especially recently, they had been moving more and more frequently. The group of 8 even found several Tianzhao divine realm cultivators from the sword realm. They were not very powerful. After the interrogation, God Lu was very shocked. Those Tianzhao divine realm cultivators hiding in the sword realm were secretly asking about the source of Zhang Wu's 8 perfect heavenly wheels. Chapter 2236. Zhang Wu's celestial origin god was born in the primeval world, and Tianzhao god realm definitely didn't investigate this point. During the Battle of Azura Foam, Jun Mo was defeated by Qin Hao and was fatally injured. Although he died in the bathtub pit in Yunzhe divine realm, the root cause of his death was Qin Hao's evil force. And what the Heavenly Edict God King was investigating was this. He wanted to dig out the source of the evil force from Zhang Wu's 8 perfect celestial wheels. Zhang Wu was expelled from the primeval world with Qin Hao. Qin Hao had forged a perfect celestial wheel, and Zhang Wu was naturally there as well. It wasn't difficult for Tian Zhao to guess that it was definitely an origin world with a complete Dao. Jinni City, also known as Sword King City, was the supreme main city of the great Dao Sword World. As the 3 worlds merged and the world powers mixed, the distance between the various celestial Dao continents began to shrink. The entire Sword World star field slowly underwent a huge change. Just like what Qin Hao saw outside, it was about to completely merge. This also led to the birth of many new celestial Dao continents due to the fusion of world powers. As for Jinni City, it absorbed the essence of the Endless World, Rikujinji, and True Dragon World to form a vast continent. It was located at the core of the 3 worlds, and its area was still expanding. It seemed like it was about to evolve into a divine realm. The 3 great sword worlds unanimously elected Wuk as the successor of the Sword God King. He built the Sword King Palace and the Sword King Academy in Jinni City. The original top sword gods of the 3 worlds continuously filled the important positions in the palace and the academy. Now, Jinni City was a miniature version of the 3 great sword worlds. Sword Dao was no longer separated. Qin Hao followed Lu Shun to Jinni City. The moment the celestial Dao descended, Jinni City was incomparably vast. It was even more vast and majestic than the endless divine realm. The city was flourishing, and sword intent soared into the sky. Everywhere was shrouded in a strong sword aura, showing the magnificent scenery of mountains and rivers. When they arrived at the Sword King Palace, the scenery was even more shocking. A magnificent palace complex was spread out. Several towering sword pagodas stood below the palace, and a sword river flowed for the 9 heaven sword waterfall around the palace complex. On the east side of the Sword King Palace was a vast battlefield. It was a vast battlefield. When Qin Hao looked over, he was immediately infected by the murderous aura. Zhang Wu's Izaz's was battlefield. Blood Demon Sword World. Qin Hao. That is the sword battle hall. God Lu explained to the shocked Qin Hao. That battle back then had dealt a heavy blow to the sword realm, but it had also inspired them. He had always been higher than the heavenly pathholders. When Seamless was reincarnated, he had wanted to make Qin Hao the Sword Prince. Unfortunately, Jun Mo had disrupted everything. The Sword Prince who controlled the great path sword realm today was very likely to be Qin Hao. The hall full of sword deities and masters of the heavenly way, including God Lu and Dragon Master, would all become Qin Hao subordinates. This was originally decided by the floating glass sword discourse. If Seamless were still here, he would also listen to Qin Hao. However, the sword gods and the heavenly Dao wielder were worthy of this bow. If they had not fought to the death and used their blood to pave a way out, perhaps there would not be Qin Hao in the wilderness. Unfortunately, Seamless Divine Master, the 6 founding elders of the Academy, Daisakong, the Celestial Sovereign, and Big Dipper were not present. Junior 3, where have you been all these years? Loi choked. She looked at Qin Hao. He had left the sword world for 300 years. She did not know how many heavenly realms he had drifted through, how many bullies he had encountered, and how many powerful opponents he had encountered. To be able to return alive, he must have suffered a lot. It's a long story. Qin Hao took Loi's hand and gently pressed her head against his chest. His expression was full of love. Before the battle, Seamless wanted him and Loi to become brother and sister. Only then could he completely let go. Qin Hao had recultivated for 4 lifetimes. Adding up his age, he was actually much older than Loi. Naturally, he was the elder brother. Now that Senior Seamless was gone, and the Celestial Sovereign had also left, Loi was all alone. The only person she could feel close to and rely on was her brother Qin Hao. But at this moment, she was still worried for Qin Hao. She was afraid that he would suffer outside. Junior's sister couldn't take the blows several times. If not for the fact that she was still drifting outside and worried that you wouldn't be able to see her when you returned, perhaps she would have already. On the side, very clear wrong side. Loy might have already committed suicide. She had been born as an orphan. Later, when she finally found some fatherly love from Seamless, the divine master. Of course, Chin Hao was not the only one who could support Loy until now. The martial god had risked his life and was willing to use his Tao body to protect Loy. He was also one of the reasons why the immortals of Mount Qinghua brought her to the ancestral god's orthodoxy. Loy wanted to repay the martial god, but Mount Qinghua did not want her. In the future, I won't allow anyone in this world to bully my younger sister. Qin Hao's eyes flashed with an extremely terrifying sharpness. The killing intent cultivated in the world of slaughter did not flow easily. The cold aura around him caused the expressions of the sword gods in the hall to change.